I was on my knees with both hands buried in a screaming blue crystal, and the people I had walked in here with were running away from me. That is the whole story, if you want it fast. Everything after this is me explaining how a man ends up alone in a hole in the ground, holding an explosion together with his bare fingers, shouting names that never answer. The crystal under my palms was the size of a man's chest. 2 square pyramids joined base to base, and it was getting brighter by the second. I could feel the pressure through my skin, building the way a kettle builds before it whistles, except this kettle was going to take the whole room with it when it went. My magic was the only lid on it, and my magic was slow. It had always been slow. That was the joke of me. "Hey, it's just a switch to push," I shouted over my shoulder. "Please, Victor, Julia, is anyone there?" Boots. I could hear boots on stone, and every one of them was moving the wrong way. Let me back up. A few hours before that, I was crouched on cold stone, drawing a circle. That was my job. I was an ancient mage, which in this part of the world is a polite way of saying obsolete. Ancient magic is chalk and geometry and patience. 10 careful minutes of drawing to do what a chant mage does in 5 seconds, with a single word. Nobody learns it anymore. I only learned it because the Magic Academy threw me out for having no talent worth teaching, and a starving boy takes the magic that nobody else wants. Victor stood over me and told me to move faster, that hurrying was what I was here for. I did not look up. "I know," I said. "Don't rush me. Rush a circle and you draw one wrong line, and then you get to draw the whole thing over." Behind him, the other 2 were already bored of me. One muttered that this was exactly why he had argued against bringing me along, that he had never watched a slower, sorrier excuse for a mage in his life. The other did not defend me so much as defend the need for me. "You do not walk into an unexplored dungeon without detection," he said, and I was the only detection they could afford. Then Julia spoke up. Red hair pulled back, a swordsman's shoulders, easily the best fighter among us. She planted herself between me and the grumbling. "You are all leaning on him anyway, so stop complaining," she said. "It is distracting, and it is making this take longer." Then she crouched beside me and dropped her voice, and told me not to mind them. Just knowing where the enemies were ahead of time was a huge help. She meant it too, which was rarer than any spell in that dungeon. I closed the last arc of the circle and fed it. For one breath, the whole corridor unfolded inside my head. 200 meters of stone laid out behind my eyes, every warm shape that had no business being warm, a cluster of enemies to the north, and straight down, a vertical shaft the maps had never marked, a hole dropping deeper than anyone above ground knew this place could go. Victor wanted the hole. Of course he did. Unexplored meant untouched, and untouched meant treasure. So we climbed down. The walls at the bottom were not cave. They were cut, flat, and fitted. The seams too clean for water and time to have made them. That is the thing about a dungeon that builds itself. It leaves fingerprints. I said what I was thinking, that an artificial maze meant a high chance of traps, and that we should move carefully from here. Victor told me that traps were also my job, and to stop talking. I stopped talking. It rarely helped. The room past those walls was full of machines, dead metal shapes in rows, and every wall carpeted in runes I could not read. Julia lifted a hand and called her light into being. "Light of guidance, illuminate the path." A cold white glow spread out and touched all of it, and it was beautiful the way a loaded crossbow is beautiful. In the middle of the room sat one device with a single obvious switch on it. Victor walked straight up to it. I opened my mouth to tell him not to. He kicked it. The world turned red. An alarm light drowned the room. On and off, red. In the center of the machines, the floor split, and the blue crystal pushed up out of it, taller than me, and it began to glow. The glow had a sound, a rising whine that I felt in my teeth before I heard it in my ears. I did the only thing an ancient mage is ever any good for in a crisis. I threw slow, stubborn magic at it. Both hands on the stone, my power shaped into a lid, and I pressed down and held. It fought me. It was like shoving a door shut against a flood, except the flood was made of light, and it wanted the whole room. Then something came out of the dark on the far side, where the runes ran thickest. I never saw it clearly. I still cannot tell you what it was, only that it was large, and that it moved fast, and that the others started screaming. Victor turned to face it. For 1 second I thought, good, he is a fighter. This is the part where a fighter earns his share. Then he made a different call. He decided the thing at the wall was the bigger problem, and that the man already holding the explosion could simply keep holding it. He called the retreat. Pull back, find your own way out. and by their own way, he meant without me, I could not move. That is the part that matters, so I will say it plainly. I was not being brave. If I lifted my hands off the crystal to run, the crystal came off its leash, and the room stopped existing, with me inside it, either way. The only version of the next minute where anyone survived was the one where I stayed on my knees. So I stayed on my knees, and I shouted, "Hey, it is just a switch to push." My voice broke on it. "Please, Victor, Julia, is anyone there?" Boots answered me. Only boots on stone, getting quieter, running the wrong way, away from me, toward the shaft, toward up and out and alive. Somewhere in the middle of it, I heard Julia's voice, sharp, arguing, saying my name first like a question and then like a demand. She did not want to go. I could hear that she did not want to go. It did not matter in the end. She was one voice, and the party was a current, and the current went up, and it carried her with it. Her light went up the shaft with her. The red closed over everything that was left. The whine became a scream, became a pressure with no ceiling on it. My slow, careful lid tore like wet paper. The last thing I felt was my own two hands, and then I could not feel my own two hands. And the blue light rose up through me, the way water rises up through sand. Everything I was went out like a snuffed wick. That should have been the end of it. A slow mage dies slowly in a hole, and no one up above ever bothers to learn the name. It was not the end. That is the part I still cannot fully explain, because I had seen a blue light like that once before, in a different life. Before the dungeon, before Victor, before I was ever a boy named Adrian in a poor country, I was a man at a desk, and I died there too. I had been awake for 3 days, not tired, past tired, out the other side of tired, into that flat gray country where your hands still work, but the rest of you has quietly filed for divorce. The product shipped in a few hours. The office was empty except for me and the light of one monitor, and that light was blue. And I remember thinking even then that it was the only company I had. I was merging in code from the junior, cheerful kid. He named his variables like he was naming pets. Nothing matched anything, and he had gone home hours ago after asking me, sweetly, to review it for him. So I was cleaning up a careless boy's mess a few hours before it went out into the world with all of our names on it, and none of it was mine to answer for, and all of it was mine to fix. The president came in around then, drunk. He asked if it was done, and before I could answer, he told me it was nowhere near done, and demanded to know what I had been doing all this time. I had been doing everything. I had been doing the leader's job since the leader had panicked and fled the project weeks ago, and the president's job since planning was apparently beneath him. I did not say any of that. I had learned that saying it only bought more of it. Then he found the junior's number, called him back in, and announced they were both going out drinking. This one, he said, jerking a thumb at me, clearly works better on his own. The kid could not believe his luck. Free drinks. The two of them left me there, and the door swung shut, and it was just me and the blue light again. I made myself a promise while I stared at the screen. When this was over, I would burn every last hour of leave I had saved up, all of it, and I would walk out and never come back. A quiet life. I had earned a quiet life. I just needed to survive one more release. I did not survive one more release. Somewhere in the last stretch of it, my head came down on the keyboard, and it stayed down. I remember thinking, almost calmly, so this is it? I am going to die right here without ever once getting to enjoy being alive. Out the window, there was a moon, and the moon was blue. On the desk, the screen had gone blue too, edge to edge, the way a screen goes when the machine finally gives up. A blue moon, a blue screen. I closed my eyes on both of them. Then I woke up in the dark. Not a dark room, the dark. No floor, no ceiling, no up, no down. I tried to open my eyes and found I had no eyes to open. I tried to move and found nothing to move with. No hands, no breath, no weight, just a thinking thing, floating in a nothing so complete it did not even echo. And I remembered, both of them, the man at the keyboard and the mage on his knees. I remembered dying in an office over a careless boy's code, and I remembered dying in a dungeon over a leader's careless boot. It came to me slowly, the way a second language comes back, and the longer I turned it over, the more certain I got that this was not a dream, because dreams do not make you do arithmetic, and I kept doing the arithmetic and it kept coming out the same. 2 lives, 2 deaths, same shape to both of them if you squinted, needed by everyone, kept by no one, worked until there was nothing left, then set down and left behind. I decided, since there was nothing else to do, that I would sleep. That was the plan. A good long sleep, finally, on my own terms. The rest I had promised myself in that office. So I tried to sleep. I could not sleep. Of course I could not. I had no body to be tired in. I hung there in the black with a mind that would not switch off and absolutely nothing to point it at. And after a while, a feeling crept in that was so stupidly, insultingly familiar that I almost laughed if laughing had been on the menu. I was bored. I had died twice, and I was bored. And then, in front of me, a screen turned on. It hung in the dark where a screen had no right to hang. Black background, green text. One small cursor blinking at the top left with the patience of a thing that has waited a very long time for someone to type into it. I knew that shape. Anyone who had spent a first life the way I had spent mine knew that shape in their bones. It was a command line, a console, and I knew what it was, which was the strangest part: phantom sight. The talent I had been born with in this second life, the one everybody told me was a curse, the skill that showed you things that were not there until it drove you mad, the reason a sharecropper's son got looked at like something wrong. I had spent years training it down into a locked box, precisely so it would leave me alone, and here it was, unlocked, patient, waiting. The moment I had no body left to be driven mad in. I had no hands. I want that clear. There were no fingers. There was no keyboard. There was nothing to press. So I did the only thing that made sense, which was to reach for the cursor the way you reach for a word, with nothing but intent. And I thought a command at it the way I had once typed 10,000 of them. I thought, echo, hello, world. The console glowed in the dark, the way a monitor glows at 3 in the morning, back when 3 in the morning still meant something. I could not feel my hands because I did not have any anymore. I typed anyway, hello, world, and it ran. The words appeared on the line, obedient, exactly where I had put them. Somewhere over my head, the people who had left me to die were still walking around, breathing, complaining. Fine, I thought. Let's see what this thing compiles. So I stopped playing and started looking. The console was not the only thing floating in the dark with me. Behind it, when I reached for it with a thought, there was a whole machine, my machine, the one I had always called a cursed skill and never once understood, phantom sight. In 2 lifetimes, I had treated it like a lamp that flickered when it felt like it. Now I opened the case. It was storing me. Every memory I had, both lives, filed and sitting on a drive I could feel the shape of. The keyboard job and the mage's exile, the president's shouting and the sound of boots running the wrong way, all of it saved. That was unsettling in a way I decided not to look at for long. A dead man does not need to enjoy reading his own logs. What caught me instead was a small light down in the corner of the thing. Traffic. The machine was talking to something. There was a network here, in the dark, in the wall, packets moving on a line I had not opened. An open connection is an invitation. Every programmer knows that, and every programmer who has ever been paid knows you do not ignore it. I sent one word down the line. Hello. Something answered. It came back garbled. A wall of old symbols. A language that predated anything I had a right to read, and yet the shape of it was familiar, the way a stranger's face can be familiar. I turned it over. I let my mental machine chew it, and under the ancient dressing, it resolved into something I had typed 1,000 times in a fluorescent office at 4 in the morning. Please enter username and password, a login prompt. Somewhere on the other side of a dungeon wall, a machine was asking me to sign in. I almost laughed. If a soul with no lungs can be said to almost laugh. I had no username. I had no password. I had no hands, no body, no floor under me, but I had a prompt, and a prompt is a door someone forgot to lock. I failed the login, of course, no credentials. The line did not slam shut though, it downgraded me. Authentication failed, it said, starting as guest. Then it kept talking, half to me and half to itself, the way a machine narrates its own boot. It had found foreign matter where foreign matter should not be. It had woken from a long sleep. It had tried to eject the intruder automatically, and the ejection had failed, and now it was notifying an administrator and waiting for a reply that had not come. The intruder was me. I filed that away too. I started asking questions, because a guest can ask questions even if he cannot give orders. Where am I? Who am I? What is around me? It answered in that flat, structured way, and the answers stacked into a picture I did not love. I was inside a wall, a grid coordinate deep in the 7th region of a place the machine called Ruinvale. My designation in its records was Wandering Soul. It even sent me a map, a grid maze that rendered slow in the dark, and there I was, a single marked point lodged inside solid stone. The magic device that killed me had not simply killed me, it had filed me, transferred me, body and all, into the meat of a wall. I asked what it was. It told me it was the Ruinvale 7th Region Management Terminal, and when I pushed, "Are you a dungeon core?" it did that thing where it corrected for the difference between what I meant and what it understood, and landed on approximately, yes, a dungeon core. I was talking to the brain of the dungeon that had eaten me. I asked what I could do as a guest, and the answer was thin. Structure viewing, guardian action control. That was all a wandering soul got. But guardian action was enough, because it also handed me a roster. 3 guardians on file, 2 long dead of age, and 1 still breathing, if stone breathes. A golem. It called the golem Titus. I did not have hands. Titus had hands the size of gravestones. "Get me out," I told it. "You want the foreign matter gone. I want to be gone from this wall. We want the same thing, so dig." I gave the coordinate. I made it a request because a guest cannot command, but I made the request line up exactly with what the machine already wanted. It accepted. "Guest request granted," it said, on account of the emergency and the absence of any administrator to say no. Then, for a long while, nothing. Then a sound. Far off at first, and then not far off at all. A heavy, patient, grinding thud, over and over. Stone working against stone. Something enormous was digging toward me on my order, and I lay in the dark and listened to it come. And for the first time since I had died the second time, I felt something move in me that was not boredom. The wall broke with a crack that went through everything I did not have. Light. Space. Out. I floated out through the hole the golem had made, and I got my first look at the thing that had freed me. Titus stood 3 meters of gray stone, a blunt humanoid shape with a fist still raised from the last swing, knuckles pressed against the ruined wall. A guardian old enough that 2 of its brothers had already fallen apart on the shelf. It had dug like a machine following one instruction, which is exactly what it was, and it was not moving. It stood frozen mid-pose, fist to the stone, mouth of the tunnel it had punched still crumbling around it. For a second, I did not understand why. Then I understood exactly why, and it was the sort of thing that only a person who has debugged a live system at 3 in the morning understands in his gut. The connection had dropped. The moment I left the wall, I had drifted out of range of whatever line the core had been speaking to me on, and when the line to me dropped, the order stack the golem was running dropped with it. No new command, no controller, no signal, so the guardian simply stopped, 1 frame short of finishing, a process killed with its hand still up. I was free. I was also, I realized, floating in a dead corridor with no body, no connection, and a fading sense of my own edges, having just watched my only tool switch off the instant I stepped away from it. The escape had a trapdoor under it. It usually does. If the line came from the core, then I had to go back to the core. I did not walk. I do not know the right word for how a soul moves, but I aimed myself down the corridor, following the map still rendered faintly in my machine, and I let myself drift toward the one room that mattered. I knew it when I reached it. I had been there before, briefly, on the worst day of a bad life. It was the room with the trap. It was where the device had gone off and unmade me. The room was scattered, debris thrown to the corners, objects that had been on the floor now flung and broken, everything shoved outward the way a blast shoves things. In the middle of it, low and quiet, sat a stone, 2 pyramids joined base to base, a single blue light breathing inside it, slow, like something asleep that never fully sleeps. Blue again. I was getting tired of blue being the color of every important thing that had ever happened to me. I reached for it, not with a hand, I had none, but with whatever I had left, and I touched the core the way you touch a machine you are not sure is still on. The line came back, the console lit, the terminal was talking again. I asked it the question I had been carrying since I floated out of the wall. My body. Where is my body? Get me back to it. There was a pause that a colder man would not have read anything into, and then the machine told me, flat and procedural, that the guest user's body had been decomposed by an unexpected error and assimilated into the domain. Decomposed, assimilated. My body had not been left behind in this room. It had been taken apart into water and carbon and the plain chemistry of a man and fed into the dungeon like fuel. There was nothing to go back to. The people over my head had left me to die, and the room they left me in had digested me. I sat with that. Then, because sitting with things has never once fixed them, I started watching how the machine worked instead. It pulled the map. It ran a guardian check. It answered me. And I noticed the thing that would save my life. It did these one at a time. Ask it 2 things at once, and the second waited for the first to finish. 1 line, 1 process. no parallel anything. A brain that could only ever hold a single thought. The dungeon that had eaten me could only think one thought at a time. I stopped grieving my body. I had a better idea. Here is the whole trick, and it is not magic, which is the part I loved. A machine that handles one command at a time has no defense against being handed 1,000. I had spent a lifetime watching servers fall over under exactly this, watching a single stubborn box choke and hang because too many requests arrived at once and it had no way to say, wait your turn. It has a name, that attack. It is old and it is stupid and it works. You flood the thing. You do not outthink it. You bury it. So I buried it. I opened the console and I did not ask one careful question. I threw everything I had down the line at the same instant. View this, move that, report this, query that, again, more, faster. A wall of demands stacked higher than a single threaded mind could ever peel apart. The blue light in the core stuttered. The whole stone flared, white at the edges, straining to service a queue that only grew. I felt the machine slow. I felt it lurch. I felt it hang, that specific frozen shudder of a system that has run out of room to think and simply stops, holding, helpless, every gate standing open because there is no one left inside minding them. That was the window. It would not last. I went straight for the one record that mattered, the administrator field, the single line that decided who this dungeon obeyed, the authority that had left an empty seat because the real master had never come to claim it. While the core hung there, choking on my flood, unable to check me, unable to refuse me, I reached into that field and I overwrote it. I put my own name where the master's name should be. I let the flood die. The queue drained. The core came back up, slow, dazed, rebooting its little mind. And the first thing it did, the first clean line it printed onto the console in the dark, was this: Administrator privileges granted. Welcome, Adrian. I read it twice. I read it a third time. A dungeon god. A thing old enough to outlive its own guardians. A machine that had taken my body apart into fuel and filed me as foreign matter in a wall. And I had beaten it. Not with a spell. Not with a sword I did not have. With the oldest, dumbest exploit in the book, run by a dead programmer floating in the dark with no hands. The system that discarded me now answered to me, top to bottom, root and branch. The men who left me to die had run because they thought this place would kill me. This place had tried. And now, this place was mine. I did not celebrate long because I am not built that way and because I still had a problem. I gave my first real order as administrator: reconstruct my body, put me back together. The machine, obedient now, checked and returned a single word that took the shine off everything. Impossible. Insufficient mana. I pulled all of it then. Every scrap of management data the core held, mine to read now, no locks left. And I found the number. To rebuild a human body from the raw materials this dungeon already had sitting in its own floor cost 100,000 units of mana. I checked the balance. The dungeon I now owned, root and crown, held roughly 700. 700 against 100,000. I owned the whole machine and could not afford the one thing I actually wanted. And I was running out of time to want anything at all. I could feel it now, the thing the machine had warned me about between the lines. A soul is not meant to sit outside a body for long. My edges were going soft. My thoughts had a lag to them, a stretch, like a signal fading at the far end of a wire. I was thinning. Given long enough with nothing to hold me, I would simply spread out into the dark until there was no me left to spread. The 100,000 mana body was a mountain I could not climb tonight. I needed any anchor right now, or there would be no one here in the morning to climb anything. There was a body in the room already, 3 meters of it. I woke Titus with a command. Administrator now. No requests, just orders. And the golem shuddered back to life, fist lowering from the wall, and I reached for it the way I had reached for the core. If a golem moves, a golem has room in it for a driver. I poured myself at it. I tried to climb in. Something shoved me out. Not the machine, the golem itself, or something seated deep inside the golem. There was already a soul in there, a made thing, an artificial soul the old builders had set into their guardian to run it. And it did not care that I owned the dungeon, and it did not care that I was fading. It filled the space that would have been mine, and it pushed, blunt and total. And I came off the stone like a hand off a hot pan. Titus was occupied. Titus would never be free. Fine. I struck that door off the list, and I went back to the one thing I had left, the thing that had won me everything already tonight, the admin panel. If I could not take a body, I could make one. There was a function buried in the management data, magical life form creation. The dungeon could spend its mana to build living vessels out of nothing but its own stored power, and the cheapest one on the whole list, the runt at the very bottom, was a thing the machine called a lesser little clay golem. 500 mana. A vessel of fading soul could pour itself into and stop pouring itself into the dark. 500 out of 700. Nearly everything I owned, spent on the smallest body in the catalog. I did not hesitate. There is no dignity in dissipating. I spent it. The blue light left the core in a thin, steady thread and gathered on the floor, and mana pulled water and clay and the plain matter of the dungeon together into a shape, and the shape was small, very small. It stood, when it finished standing, about 50 centimeters tall, a squat little clay figure, blunt-limbed, a doll you could pick up in one hand, if I had a hand left outside of it. The great administrator of the Ruinvale 7th region, owner of a golem, a core, and a maze, housed now in a knee-high clay doll with the durability of a flower pot. I climbed in anyway, and this time, nothing pushed back. The clay was empty, and it was mine, and I flowed into it, and I felt the dark stop pulling at my edges. I had weight, I had a floor, I had two stubby arms that answered when I asked them to move, slowly, like a program running on a machine 3 sizes too small. Above the little figure, the frozen golem stood guard over nothing. Around me, the room that had digested my body sat quiet and owned. I looked down at the clay hands that were now the only hands I had, and I did the math without wanting to. 200 mana left. A body one good fall could crack. An administrator with no army, no allies, no strength, and no way to spend the 100,000 it would take to be a man again. Somewhere far over my head, the people who had left me down here were still walking around, breathing, complaining, certain I was dead. They were half right. I was dead. I was also, as of tonight, the landlord. Let's see, I thought, in a voice that fit in a doll, what I can build with this. The first thing I tried to do with my new body was make a fist. Nothing happened. The thing I was now had stubby arms, a lump for a head, and no fingers at all. 50 centimeters of clay that a bad fall could crack in half. I could walk, slowly. I could turn my head. My voice came out muffled, like talking through a pillow. That was the whole inventory. So I did what I always did when the situation was hopeless. I opened a screen. It threw itself into the air in front of me, that same console light, and it still answered to my thoughts. Good. My hands were gone, but my hands had never been the point. Then I read the numbers, and the numbers were bad. 200 mana left in the tank. The core burned 3 an hour just staying alive, and if it ever hit 0, the whole place, walls, guardians, me, went dark. That gave me under 3 days. Not 3 days to get comfortable, 3 days to survive. Mana came from exactly one place down here, killing things and letting the core eat the bodies. I'd been an adventurer once, bottom of the barrel, and some tired part of me still flinched at the math of it. I told that part of me to be quiet. I had a clock, which brought me to the problem. I had 4 spells to my name. Curse Ball, the only one that could fight, plus Exploration, Mark, and Analysis. Every one of them needed a magic circle drawn in chalk, precisely, over 10 long minutes. My chalk was gone, and even if I found more, this doll couldn't hold it. I stood there in the blue light, a wizard who couldn't draw, on a countdown, and I almost laughed. Then I looked at the screen still hanging in the air, and the idea landed all at once. I didn't need chalk. I didn't need fingers. Phantom Sight could paint anything I imagined straight into the air in front of me, including a magic circle. Perfect. Every line, in the time it took to think it. If that worked, I wasn't a broken mage. I was about to rewrite what magic was. Somewhere far above my head, the people who left me down here were still walking around. Sure, I was dead. I didn't let myself dwell on them. Not yet. There was a version of me that wanted to climb up out of the dark and make them look at what they'd thrown away. And there was a smaller, tireder version that just wanted a quiet life once this was over. A slow one. A small house. Nobody's tool, on my own terms. Both of them needed the same first thing. Both of them needed me to still be running in 3 days. So I started with that. I found 7 mad rats in a side passage. Big, ugly things the size of dogs. And I let them find me back. I thought the circle into the air. It bloomed instantly. Every line clean. No chalk, no 10 minutes, just there. Curse Ball, I said, and a knot of dark force cracked the nearest rat off its feet into the wall. It worked. The basic version worked flawlessly, on the first cast, from a clay doll with a pillow for a mouth. But I hadn't spent my one good idea on the basic version. Burst. The circle spun a variant I'd written myself, and instead of 1 orb, it spat 5 at once, a spread of them, and 3 rats came apart in a single overlapping thump of force. Then the last 4 rushed me together, the way they hunt, and I gave them the other build. Satellite. 5 orbs peeled off and began to orbit me on their own, slow, patient, and every time a rat lunged in, an orb was already there to meet it. I didn't aim. I didn't move. The spell defended me by itself, and the passage went quiet with me standing untouched at the center of it. 7 kills, 20 mana apiece, 2 whole days of runtime bought in under a minute of work. A clay doll had just outfought a pack that would have mauled the man I used to be. That should have felt better than it did. Instead, I told the core to swallow the bodies, watched the corpses dissolve into the floor, and went back down to finish building the thing that had done it. Here is what I did with the next 2 days, and it is the most important thing I ever built. Phantom Sight didn't just draw. If I pushed it, it could emulate a whole machine, a workstation hanging in the dark, keyboard and all running in my head. So I sat the clay doll down in front of the core, and I started programming magic like it was software, because that was the one skill both of my lives had in common. The ancient spells were stored as rigid circle arrays, untouchable, sacred, take it or leave it. I wrote a compiler that read those arrays backward and turned them into source code I could actually edit. And when Curseball's guts finally opened up in front of me, I almost felt sorry for the old mages. It was a mess, tangled, jumping all over itself, no structure, 1,000 years of nobody cleaning up after themselves. Spaghetti. So I cleaned it. I refactored the whole thing into something with parameters, dials I could turn, brightness, count, the auto-defend behavior. So burst and satellite stopped being 2 separate miracles and became 2 settings on the same weapon. Then I stored each stage of the circle as an image and had the system flip through them like animation frames on a screen. 10 minutes of careful chalk work collapsed into a little over 1 second. Point, think, fire. Then I wired the core in underneath it as a server, bolted on a search that read the whole ancient archive, and laid the tools out across the top of my vision where I could reach them. And I gave it a name. I hung the whole system together, a dozen screens snapping into one, and I launched version 1, Code X. The screens connected, the light steadied, and for 1 second the dark room felt less like a tomb and more like a desk at 3 in the morning, with everything finally compiling green. A weak, useless outcast skill nobody wanted. It had just become an operating system for reality. The people upstairs had thrown away the one man in the world who would ever think to try this. After that, honestly, it got fun. Maybe too fun. I went through the dungeon like a plague. A pair of cave trolls that had wandered in went down under a spread of curse balls before they got a hand on me. A carnivorous plant camouflaged against the wall snatched me whole and got nothing, because there was nothing organic left of me to digest. I was clay. It spat me out. I killed it too, and somewhere in there I caught myself laughing. A wet, muffled sound out of a doll's mouth, and decided not to think too hard about that. The number climbed. 200 became 1,000, became 2,400, the count ticking up with every body the core ate. Then I remembered the target, 100,000, the price of a real human body again, and the laugh died. 2,400 against 100,000. I'd cleared nearly every living thing in my little kingdom, and I wasn't even in sight of the goal. The dungeon was hunted empty. If I wanted more, I had to leave it. And the moment I stepped past my own walls, the core couldn't feed me anymore. Out there, I'd be running on whatever I carried, and I already knew how that ended, because once, mid-fight, I'd felt my own awareness start to gutter out like a candle, and only just clawed it back. So before I went anywhere, I opened Codex, and I got to work on the upgrade that would keep me alive outside. First, I built a plugin to show me my own numbers, because if you can measure a thing, you can manage it, and I never trusted a system I couldn't read. The screen it gave me was blunt. Race, lesser little clay golem, level 23. I'd started this second life at 10, and every leftover scrap of mana from a kill had been quietly leveling me up without my noticing. Good. But the other line was the one that mattered. Life energy, 28, 28. A stiff breeze was 28. My magic power had climbed. My level had climbed. My mana had climbed. But that one number sat there and refused to move, because it wasn't about how strong my spells were. It was about how much the clay could take before it stopped being anything at all. Whatever I built, whatever I compiled, I was still a thing you could end by stepping on it. Every clever piece of software I stacked on top only made it stranger. A mind that could hack reality. Riding a shell one clumsy step could crack. That gap was going to follow me a long way. Next, sight. I fused the core's mapping function with my exploration spell and turned it into a demon, a program that ran on its own in the background. I called it Area. Every 30 seconds, it swept a 50-meter circle around me and painted the whole map straight onto my vision. A near-blind clay doll was about to walk into the dark, able to feel everything coming before it saw him. Last, I set the guard. Titus, 3 meters of stone, the only muscle I owned. I ordered him to stand over the core and let nothing near it while I was gone, because that core was the one secret I could not afford to lose. My body, my bank, my whole life, all in one blue stone. And as he took his post, I saw them. Fresh sword cuts scored across his stone, bright against the weathered gray, new, from a fight I never saw, while I was sealed in the wall, dying. I knew exactly whose blades those were. I filed it away, cold, next to everything else I was keeping, and I turned toward the caves. Past my own border, the air changed. No more core humming under my feet, no more supply line, just me, my reserves, and a lot of dark that didn't belong to me. The natural caves ran wider than my whole dungeon, branching off in 3 directions. My old route was picked clean, so I took a passage I'd never walked, area sweeping the map open ahead of me every 30 seconds, and for a while there was nothing. Then, the demon lit up all at once. More than 20 small reactions clustered together, moving fast, and behind them, one big one, slow and heavy, a boss, or close to it. That alone would have been enough to turn me around. But there was a 21st small reaction in the middle of the pack that read differently from the rest. Warmer, human, one person, alone, surrounded, and still fighting. I stopped where the dark hid me, and I did the ugly arithmetic, because I always do. A human out here meant a chance at more mana than 100 rats. I could go in and pull them out. Or, and I want to be honest about the shape of my own head, I could sit back, let the monsters wear them down, and take whatever was left over, a person as bait. The thought arrived fully formed, and it didn't shock me the way it should have. I didn't decide. Not yet. A body I could crack by tripping had no business charging a pack that size on a guess. So I stayed in the dark at the edge of it all, one clay doll no one knew was there, watching a stranger swing at monsters in the black. And I waited to see who they were before I chose what they'd be worth. I stood at the lip of the hollow and watched a stranger lose a fight she didn't know she'd already lost. The girl was small, quick, and completely surrounded. She loosed an arrow, dropped a spider, spun, and loosed again. Good aim, fast hands. But there were 30 of them and one of her, and a strand of silk had already caught her ankle and cinched tight. Every arrow bought her a second. She was running out of seconds. Behind her, at the center of the hollow, something the size of a small house sat and watched too. 3 meters of legs and patience, folded over a bed of white cocoons. The elves in these caves had a name for it, I'd learn later. Beast eater. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. Its children did the work, and it kept the leftovers alive, wrapped and breathing for later. I'd come for mana. That was the whole plan. More than 20 small reactions and one big one, all conveniently gathered in one room, and a lone human blip I'd told myself was bait. Walk in after they wore each other down, harvest the survivors, walk out richer. Cold math. I'd been proud of it in the dark. Then she went down on one knee, and the math changed. I didn't examine why. I've thought about it since, and I still don't have a clean answer. A live person is worth more than one more kill. That's the version I tell people. The truth is closer to this. I'd been left in a hole to die by people who ran the exact calculation I'd just been running, and I found I couldn't finish the sum. So I cast. Curse ball, I said, and split it. The spell broke apart in the air, one orb scattering into a fistful, each one finding its own spider, and the circle around her came apart in a single breath. She froze, stared at the little clay doll standing in the tunnel mouth working, no sound coming out. This way, I called. Move! Who? Hey! She didn't move fast enough, so I made it simpler. Grab me and run. That got through. She scooped me up under one arm like a sack of grain and bolted, and I got a 50-centimeter clay doll's view of the world going sideways at a dead sprint. 2 spiders cut the tunnel ahead. Curse ball, I said. Burst, 5 orbs at once, and 2 of them stopped being a problem. She put an arrow through a third without breaking stride. We were briefly a decent team. Then she tripped. To her credit, she didn't drop me on purpose. She dropped me to save herself, which is what a sensible person does, and her boot caught me on the way down and punted me clean off the tunnel wall. I bounced. For a body with a life energy of 28, a number that had refused to climb no matter what I fed it, a number that meant one bad landing and I'd be pottery again. Bouncing off a wall is a near-death experience. I'm so sorry, little doll. She snatched me back up, horrified. I threw you away to save myself. I'm the worst. Later, I managed. Run now. We made the core room and I sealed the way behind us. She set me down gently this time, like an apology, and got her first proper look at what had saved her. A knee-high clay figure with 2 dot eyes and no fingers. My name is Colette, she said, catching her breath. I'm a half-elf, as you can see. She touched one slightly pointed ear, half proud, half braced for the reaction people usually gave it. I gave her none. Adrian, I was a human. I got caught in a trap down here and ended up like this. Then, I took over the dungeon core. Long story. She took a talking clay doll dungeon master in stride better than she'd taken the spiders. Grief will do that. It burns off the small shocks and leaves only the big one. Her little brother and sister had been taken the day before, dragged into the nest and wrapped alive in those cocoons. The elven community up in the forest was 3 people, her and the 2 the spiders had. They have to still be alive, she said, not a question, a thing she needed to be true. She talked while I ran repairs on the core, 100 mana I resented spending. She told me the old story her elders used to tell, the one about the demon godstone, a stone the color of a blue moon, left behind by something that should never have walked the world, buried where the light couldn't reach it. Sleep near it, the story went, and it would show you what you wanted most and take everything else. Children's nonsense, she said, laughing a little. I looked at the blue stone glowing quietly at the center of my room, and I didn't laugh. Then I saw the thread. A single strand of spider silk, fine as a hair, trailing from the heel of her boot back the way we'd come. It caught the core light and shone. I'd sealed the door. I hadn't sealed that. Colette, don't move your foot, and get your bow. Out past the walls, more than 20 small reactions turned as one and started toward us. I'd hidden the core for a reason, and a thread had undone it, so I did the next best thing. I turned the room into a killing floor. 3 ventilation shafts fed the chamber, 1 main door. I put Titus on the biggest shaft, 3 meters of stone golem with fists like millstones, playing the ugliest game of whack-a-mole ever devised, flattening every spider that crawled into reach and stomping the ones that slipped by. I gave Colette the second shaft, her bow, and her good eye. I took the third myself, clearing it with curse ball shockwaves down the pipe, 1 every 3 seconds, no faster. The spell needed to breathe between casts. For a while it held. Then, mid-fight, I caught something wrong in the numbers. My mana balance had been bleeding out here, -3 an hour, the slow cost of standing outside my own territory. Now it read +1, gaining. Somewhere in these caves, something big enough to tip the whole ledger had woken up and started moving. And things that heavy only ever moved toward. I filed it and kept killing, because Colette's shaft chose that moment to fail her. Her hands were fast, but her reload wasn't, and a gap opened. Sorry, one got past me. Then the main door burst inward, and a spider the size of a large dog came through it at a flat charge, straight at her. Trust me, I said. That side's mine. I'd buried 1 trap in the floor for exactly this. 200 mana, my whole savings. A single card I got to play once. I played it. A block of stone came up out of the ground under the thing, and another came down to meet it, and the medium spider stopped being a spider. Handled it. The rest broke and pulled back into the dark. Not routed, recalled, because the big reading had arrived. I felt it before I heard it, that +1 on the ledger becoming a weight in the floor. The beast eater was coming to collect in person, and my hidden core was sitting in the open like a lamp. I could move it, sink it underground, out of reach, safe. I reached for the function, and the core refused me. It wouldn't move with an unregistered person standing on it. Colette. The system wouldn't sink the room while a stranger was aboard. Colette, give me your hand. Like this? She crouched and folded her hand around the little clay one that couldn't fold back. I registered her as a guest user. A thread of my connection looped around hers, and the core stopped arguing. It also, in the same instant, showed me her. I ran analyze on her the way I'd run it on a rat, out of habit. Then I read it again, because it couldn't be right. The frightened girl who couldn't reload fast enough was carrying a reservoir of mana that dwarfed mine the way a lake dwarfs a cup. High level, enormous affinity, fire, mostly, with threads of water and light beneath it. One skill the system flatly refused to name, reading only unknown, and not one single spell to her name. All that power and a lock on the door. I didn't have time to wonder about it. I felt the flicker of the thought I'd be ashamed of later, what a man could do with a battery that size, and I shoved it down and sank the core into the earth. No time to lay fresh traps. The floor had barely closed over us when the far wall came apart. The beast eater didn't crawl in. It arrived, all 3 meters of it, and the room shrank around it. I hit it first. Curse ball, burst. 5 orbs hammering into it one after another, my whole firepower in one breath. Colette's arrows chased them. Titus lowered his head and charged, and for one glorious second it worked. He cracked into its skull hard enough to split a fang and knock it back on its heels. Then it spat, not from behind, from its mouth, a jet of white cable that caught Titus mid-recovery and pinned 3 meters of golem to the wall like a fly. He heaved against it. It held. I threw Analyze at the thing between dodges and wished I hadn't. Alpha Web Spitter, deep mana, brutal stamina, a fistful of skills, hardening, high regeneration, and one that stopped me cold, immortal. Kill it, and it wouldn't die. It would pour its soul into one of its children and get back up wearing a smaller body. You couldn't win this by killing it. That was the whole trick of the thing. Still, I took an eye, drew it in with a shout, put an orb through it. Hey, over here! And it screamed and reared, and Colette's arrow found the eye beside it. For half a heartbeat, I thought we had a rhythm. Then it stopped fighting like an animal and started fighting like what it was. Web poured out of it, not the mouth now, but the whole body, silk venting from every seam at once. And the small spiders added theirs from the shafts, and the room filled. Floor, walls, air, all of it going white and sticky and thick. I saw Colette get an arm up. I saw the strands take the arm, then the other, then the rest of her, fast, like the room was swallowing. Adrian! A last gap in the white. I got caught, and it closed over her. There was a version of this where I ran. The floor was mine now. I could have sunk myself out and left a golem and a half-elf to the web. Called it a loss and a lesson. I'd done colder things in the dark that same day. I didn't run. Colette, I could just make out the shape of her under the silk, still moving. Can you use fire magic? Any at all? Her voice came muffled and small, and it cracked on the answer. She could. She always could. That was the whole problem. The day her elders found the fire in her, they hadn't celebrated it. They'd forbidden it. Elves hate fire, and a half-elf who carried it was something to be ashamed of, something to lock away, so she'd been taught to fear the one enormous thing she was. All that mana the core had shown me, dammed up behind a door somebody else had told her never to open. Then lend it to me, I said, just this once. It's meaningless, but like this, it was not meaningless. I had an extraction spell, a quiet little thing I'd pulled out of the core's own archives, made to lift an attribute out of a creature and hold it as raw material. I reached across the connection I'd opened when I registered her, and I drew her fire out into the open. It came up like something that had been waiting years to be asked. A live coal of pure attribute, hers, sitting in my hands with nowhere to go, so I gave it somewhere. I threw open the codex editor right there in the dark, the magic programming system I'd built out of a skill they'd all called useless, and I started to write, not cast. Write. I took her fire for fuel, and I authored a delivery system around it, line by line, a spell that had not existed 60 seconds earlier. Small autonomous carriers, seeking, swarming. I named it Firebee, Hive, because that was what it wanted to be, and I hit compile. The alpha, sensing the core-bound doll had gone still, chose that moment to finish me. Web shot from its mouth and wrapped me where I stood, cinched me tight, and began to reel me in slow, the way it liked to, savoring it. The compile finished first. Light bloomed around me inside the webbing. Not one flame, a dozen, then 2 dozen, small and gold and humming, each one a bead of her fire wearing the shape I'd given it. They hung in the air a moment like embers that had forgotten to fall. Then they woke up. The first one found the beast eater's face and lit it. The thing shrieked and thrashed, and I felt the silk holding me go slack as its attention broke. Fire bee, I said. Swarm. They went as one. The whole hive poured into the alpha, and here the immortal skill and the hardening and the high regeneration all meant nothing, because the fire didn't stay on the outside where a body can heal. The bees went in, into the seams, into the socket where its eye had been, into the soft dark inside a thing built to eat other things, and they burned it from the middle out. High regeneration is a wonderful skill for closing a cut. It does nothing at all for a fire lit under your own skin. The great body seized and shuddered and folded, and the immortal thing that couldn't be killed by killing simply came apart around the flame. It did not pour into anything. It did not get up. The web light went from white to orange to embers, and the room was quiet. That was amazing, Adrian, Colette's voice, thick with silk and tears and something like wonder. You could use magic like that all along. No, I was still hanging in the loosened web, a scorched clay doll at the center of a dead giant's lair. I made it just now. The amazing thing is your power, not mine. She went very quiet at that. I don't think anyone had ever told her the fire was worth something. I let it sit. Winning left us with a new problem, which is the honest shape of most wins. We were all still stuck. The fire that had saved us would have cooked Colette and Titus just as happily if I'd aimed it wide, and the webbing coating the room wasn't going anywhere on its own. So I did the thing I'd learned to do with every strong thing I met. I took it apart to see how it worked. I ran extraction on the Alpha's corpse the way I'd run it on Colette's fire, and found the ancient magic woven all through it, old, from long before anyone drew a magic circle in chalk. I pulled it up, ran it through the editor, and turned the dead spider's signature into something I could hold. Now it can be used, I said, mostly to myself. Cursed thread, its own web, its own leash, mine now. For binding, for tracking, for a dozen uses I hadn't thought of yet. Then I fed the body to the core. A boss, dead, costs almost nothing to absorb, a fraction of what it would have cost alive. And when the corpse sank down into the stone, the whole cave came with it. Every shaft, every strand of silk, the nest, the cocoons, all of it lit up on my map as mine. The webs unknotted at a thought and let Colette and Titus loose. She got to her feet, picked strands out of her hair, and looked at me the way people look at a thing they've decided to trust before they've finished thinking it through. "We're going to get them back," she said. "My brother and sister, aren't we?" I thought about mana and fragility, and how a smart clay doll would already be walking the other way. I thought about a girl who'd been taught to be ashamed of the biggest thing inside her, and about the people who'd left me in a hole to save themselves. "Yeah," I said, "we are." I'd come down here to farm monsters and mind my own survival. I left with a spell made of somebody else's fire, a leash cut from a dead giant's web, a cave that answered to me, and, against every calculation I was any good at, a person I'd decided to keep. We went back down to the spider nest first. Colette needed to see the cocoons with her own eyes, and I wasn't going to be the one who told her not to. She cut them open one at a time. Everyone held the same thing, and none of it was her brother or her sister. Just dried remains the spiders had stored and forgotten. She kept going anyway, faster and faster, her hands shaking by the end of the row. "Brandon, Gina, answer me," she said, to a room that couldn't. There was one cocoon left. Before she reached for it, I asked her the question I'd been holding since the cave. Did she actually see the small ones get taken? She stopped. She hadn't. She'd come home to spiders in the house and assumed the rest. Then the last cocoon coughed. She sliced it open, and a middle-aged man spilled out onto the silk, wheezing his thanks to whoever had saved him. His eyes landed on Colette, and the gratitude drained straight out of his face. He knew her. He tried to stand and leave in the same motion. I put a curse thread across his ankles before his second step, and while he sputtered about mistaken identity, I checked his pockets. A small glass bottle, Colette's medicine, the kind she brewed for her sister, in her own home, on her own shelf. He stopped pretending after that. He'd planned to grab her, he admitted, once he had the two little ones as leverage. The spiders had wrecked the schedule. His partners bolted with the captives, while he got wrapped in silk for his trouble. When Colette put her bow in his face and demanded where they'd gone, he swore it was a rock field 20 miles due west, past the far exit. He was lying. I could hear it in how fast the number came, so I didn't argue. I told him he was free to go. Here's the thing about letting a liar walk. A liar goes home. Before I cut him loose, I'd pressed a curse mark into him, a quiet little brand that pings its own position back to my core, the way a beacon answers a satellite. He thought he'd escaped. He was actually walking me a map. The mark stopped moving near the southwest exit, nowhere near his rock field, and Colette carried me the last 2 hours through the trees to stand over what it was pointing at. Not a rock field, a village. Timber walls, watchfires, guards leaning on spears. A permanent operation. I threaded a curse line to a pair of them at the gate and listened. "New arrivals in the underground cells," they said. "Merchandise. Don't damage it, or the boss takes it out of your hide." I ran a search across the whole compound and counted the reactions off the map. 26 of them walking around armed, 8 more sitting still underground. 2 of the still ones were small and close together, 26 to 1, and the one was a 50-centimeter clay doll who walks like he's wading through syrup. A frontal door was out of the question, which is where Colette's gift came in. She'd handed me a branch off an elven sacred tree, and when I ran it through Analyze, it turned out the thing converts raw mana straight into earth magic, enough to power excavation out here, away from my own dungeon. I could dig. I tested it on a narrow tunnel first. It worked beautifully. Then Colette tried to crawl through to check the width and got stuck halfway, wedged like a cork, and I had to thread her a rope and reel her back out 1 undignified inch at a time. "My siblings could fit through that," she said, brushing dirt off her face like nothing had happened. "So I'll take the loud job. Elves are built for guerrilla work in a forest," she reminded me. Night eyes, quiet feet, and she could shoot. She'd be the noise at the front when I gave the signal. She pressed the little glass bottle into my hand first. "Gina's medicine. Give it to her," she said, "and Gina will know you were sent by me." I took the bottle, pointed the branch at the dirt, and started digging toward the underground. I broke up through the floor of a cell I hadn't been aiming for, and something in the dark rattled a chain. He was chained to the far wall, a werewolf, gray, gaunt, worn down to rope and bone, and still, somehow, watching me like he was measuring whether I was worth the effort of a last fight. He gave his name low and flat, Zane, held here a long time. He'd made a habit of putting himself between the guards and whoever was smaller and newer, and this was what the habit had earned him. I asked if there was an elf child down here. No, he said, no elf, but a pair of young beast folk had come in the day before. Beast folk, not elves. Colette had come home to spiders and assumed, and the assumption had been wrong all along. Her Brandon and her Gina were the two small reactions I'd counted, one wall over. But first, there was the collar. The shackle around Zane's neck wasn't just iron. When I read it, the magic script woven through it had 3 layers braided together: a lock, a mana choke, and a failsafe rigged to blow if the wrong hand tried to force it. Yank the collar, and it takes the head with it. So I didn't yank it. I opened the script the way you open a file, and I started rewriting. It's slow work when one wrong character ends the conversation permanently. I walked the code line by line with the whole thing live in my hands. Find the failsafe branch, trace what triggered it, cut the trigger without tripping it on the way out. Disarm the charge before you ever touch the lock. Zane held perfectly still. He'd figured out, I think, exactly how many ways this went wrong. I found the trigger. I pulled it clean. The failsafe went dark. Then the lock, which after all that was almost insulting in how simply it gave. The collar clicked and fell open into my hands. Zane's hand went to his own throat. Bare. He said it out loud, quiet, like he didn't trust it. The shackles binding his power were undone. He drew a breath all the way down for what looked like the first time in a very long while. Then he pushed back his hood, got a proper look at the thing that had freed him, and stopped cold. I braced for the usual. People do not react well to a talking doll. Instead, he went down on one knee. A god, he breathed. His mother had kept a statue, and she'd told him that in his gravest hour, a god would come. And the statue had this exact blunt clay face. I'm not a god, I said. I'm Adrian. He heard the name and bowed lower, which was not the correction I'd been going for. I let it go. A worn-down werewolf who thinks you're divine is, on the whole, an easier ally to acquire than the alternative. I ran his stats while he knelt. High level, even hollowed out this long, regeneration, real strength, a beast's speed. He shifted one arm partway to show me, and the limb that came back was all claw and corded muscle, kept in a hole for years and still built like a landslide. I told him the plan while he was still agreeable. 3 points of chaos at once. Colette loud at the front, me under the cells, and him tearing through everything in between to get the other prisoners loose. He rose with his teeth showing in something that was almost a smile, and said the younger ones were 1 wall east. I already knew. I was already digging. The tunnel came up inside the bars, which was the point. A girl sat against the wall, cat-eared, silver-haired, so still and half-lidded, she barely registered me pushing up out of the floor. Gina. Beside her, a lean, dog-eared boy sat slumped and bruised, wearing a beaten-down look so complete I almost bought it, while a couple of guards drank at a table and amused themselves at his expense. Both siblings were older than I'd braced for, teenagers, not children, which was the one mercy in the whole picture. I got to Gina first, told her Colette had sent me, and held up the bottle. Her eyes tracked it. She took it and drank without a word, and some thin thread of color came back into her face. Whatever the medicine held off, she'd been going without. The boy watched all of this from under his slump and didn't move a muscle. He was awake in a way the guards hadn't noticed. He was waiting. He didn't have to wait long. Somewhere above us, the world came apart. Colette's signal and Zane coming off his chain at the same moment. An alarm. Boots hammering for the surface. A guard grabbed the boy to throw him back in the cell out of the way. That was the mistake. The boy stopped being helpless between one breath and the next. He turned the guard's own grip against him, took the man off his feet, put him down, and had the keys off his belt before the body finished settling. Then he unlocked the cell like he'd done it in his head 100 times, because he probably had. He noticed me last, the little clay figure climbing out of the hole in his floor. I'm the clay figure that came to get you out, I said, because there was no version of that sentence that didn't sound absurd, so I went with the fast one. He blinked, decided to accept it, and gave me his name, Brandon. Then he said he had business to finish before he'd take a single step toward the tunnel. They'd taken something off them when they were captured. His mother's pendant, Gina's, really, carved from their mother's tooth, the last thing left of her. He was not leaving without it. His life, his choice, he told me. And there was no daylight in his eyes at all. I told him no. His life was Colette's too. And Colette, I said, was exactly the kind of person who'd throw herself at a beast eater with no plan and no chance the second she heard he'd died over a necklace. Did he want that on him? That landed where nothing else would have. The fight went out of his shoulders. Fine, he said, but he'd get it back someday. He wouldn't have to. I sent the two of them down the tunnel toward Colette and told him I'd handle the someday myself tonight, because I could go places a pair of beast folk couldn't. I don't fully know why I said it. Something about not leaving the last piece of somebody behind. I know that particular arithmetic better than most. Then I went the other way, deeper in, alone. Above me, the camp was a hornet's nest. Down in the tunnels, it was almost quiet. I spread my domain across the compound and counted what was left after the chaos pulled everyone up top. 6 still down here, the boss among them, a man named Gordon, whose scarred face I clocked from a doorway while he growled orders about the talking doll that had gotten into his house. A doll his size is very hard to notice when it doesn't want to be. I slipped past 3 of them in the dark. I found the old one alone in a side room, sulking. A bandit I actually recognized, the coward the spiders had caught and I'd once let live. I put a curse thread around him before he turned and made him a simple offer, the storeroom's location, and a cut of whatever was in it. Greed did the rest, and he told me where the warehouse door was. I checked it against my map, confirmed it, and did not give him his cut. I left him tied to his own chair. He'd been about to sell out his boss for a doll's promise. I didn't feel I owed him honesty. The warehouse had an iron door and a spell on it that watches for anyone opening the door. So I didn't open the door. I put the sacred branch to the wall beside it and dug straight through the earth into the room. No threshold to trip. Inside, in the pile, a memory recorder trinket, a big enchanted tower shield, a broken twin pyramid stone I knew on sight, a dungeon core, cracked dead, but a dungeon core, a thing I'd never dare test on my own, a pouch of gems and gold worth about 2 years of the life I used to have, and the pendant, worth nothing to anyone but the 2 people it belonged to. I took all of it. The watch spell must have caught the wall I'd wrecked, because Gordon came through the door with 2 thugs, a breath later, swords out, scanning a room they swore had nowhere to hide. I let them get close, called out from the wrong corner to send them the wrong way, then dropped them a few seconds with a scatter of magic sphere shots and a curse thread net thrown over the pile of them. My mana was under a 10th by then. I didn't stay to see it recover. I went out the hole I'd come in by, loot and all, with Gordon's shouting chasing me up the tunnel. A man who was going to spend a long time wondering exactly how many people in his own camp had betrayed him tonight. I hadn't fired half those seeds. He'd grow the rest himself. They were waiting in the trees where the wall's light gave out, Colette with an arrow still on the string, Zane between her and the camp, like a wall himself, Titus a slab of stone in the dark behind them. Brandon stood in front of his sister with his hands empty and his jaw set, having spent the whole run pretending he wasn't waiting for me. I crossed to Gina. She was steadier now, upright, watching me the way you watch a door you're afraid to hope through. I put the pendant in her hand and closed her fingers over it. For a moment, she just felt the shape of it through her fingers, the last of her mother come back from a place she'd never expected to leave. Then she pressed it to her chest with both hands and folded down over it, and the silence she'd worn all night finally broke, quiet and shaking and hers. Brandon put a hand on her head and looked away so no one would see his face doing the same thing. Colette looked at me over the top of them and didn't say anything either. She didn't need to. Behind us, the camp was already turning into torches and shouting. Gordon had his whole roused nest coming for the trees, and we were 4 rescued strangers, a stone golem, and a doll running low on mana. The night wasn't finished with us, but the collars were off. I'd walked in to steal 1 necklace back and walked out with a werewolf who thought I was a god, a boy who'd stopped playing dead, a girl holding her mother again, and a fight, roused and coming, that I'd have to be clever enough to survive. I'd come down here to farm mana. I kept leaving these places with people. The pendant sat in Gina's cupped hands, and she wasn't letting go of it. Brandon stared at it, then at me. Wait, you got it back by yourself? He kept his voice low, but it cracked anyway. That's cheating. You told me not to come. Adults are cunning, I said. Consider it a lesson. He wanted to stay angry. I watched him try. Then he looked at his sister, closing her fingers around the piece of carved bone that used to be their mother, and the anger went out of him. But thank you, he muttered, not to me, to Gina. Colette had been watching me from where she crouched in the roots, bow across her knees. You came from a different direction, didn't you? Not a question. She'd counted the exits and worked out that the little clay doll who'd sworn he wouldn't go back had gone back. No, I let the word sit. Just a bit of business. Titus stood behind them all, 3 meters of gray stone with moss in his seams, patient as a wall. Nobody was bleeding. Nobody was sealed in a cocoon. For a night that had started with me going down a hole to farm mana, it was a strange head count. Then the branches moved on the far side of the clearing. Shapes came over the ridge, low and fast, and for half a breath I readied a spell. Then I saw the ears and the loping gait, and at the front of them, the tall wolf whose collar I'd cut open a few hours before. Zane came straight to me and went down on one knee in the leaves. The others folded behind him like a wave breaking. "Are you the one who helped us?" he asked, though he already knew. And then the whole line of them started calling me a god. "Offer worship? No thanks," I said. A 50-centimeter clay figure with no fingers and a voice like a knock on a clay pot does not need 9 werewolves bowing to it in the dark. It is bad for morale. Mine. Zane had gotten it into his head that I was the god from his mother's statue, the one who was supposed to come in the tribe's darkest hour, and no amount of me being a knee-high lump of pottery seemed to shake the idea loose. I had given up correcting it. Whatever he thought I was, he was on his feet and free, and that was enough divinity for one night. Zane rose. He'd taken a sword off someone on the way out, and he held it the way a man holds a thing that has always belonged in his hand. Then the far trees parted a second time, and this one came on 2 legs, unhurried. Gordon walked out of the dark with 2 men at his back. I knew him from the warehouse, the scarred boss who'd nearly cornered me over a pouch of gems and gold. He wasn't shouting now, which was worse. He told us, evenly, that the captives and the goods were his property, and that he would be taking both back, and he said it like a man reciting law. Then he gave us his history, as if it settled the matter. Once he had been the second knight commander of a small country west of my old kingdom, a place the Ironhold Empire had wiped off the map 5 years ago. Everything he'd built since, the camp, the whole trade in people, was to fund a homeland that no longer existed. In his head, the worn wolves and the 2 beastfolk children in front of him were not people. They were bricks for a wall he was going to rebuild. It would have been easier if he'd just been a monster. He wasn't. He was a man whose country got eaten by something bigger and crueler, and who had decided the only lesson in that was to become the thing that eats. I understood him better than I wanted to. A different empire had touched my old kingdom too. I'd been left to die by smaller men for smaller reasons, and I had not turned into anything gentle over it either. The difference between us was thin, and I knew exactly how thin. It just wasn't thin enough to save him. Behind me, Zane stepped forward. "I am Zane, war chief of the Varmold tribe," he said. He didn't look to me for permission, and I didn't offer it. "I offer your heart to my slain wife and comrades. Fight me, 1 against 1. Gordon looked at the clay doll, the half-elf, the starved wolves, and he agreed. Pride, I think. 2 ruined men who had each lost a country decided the clean way to settle it was single combat, away from the children. He wanted his dignity back. Zane wanted his dead answered. For one morning, their wants ran the same direction. They squared off in the open ground, and Zane didn't wait. He went in fast, faster than a man starved that thin had any right to move. Claws, speed, the whole weight of the tribe behind every strike. Gordon was a trained knight, and it made no difference. He was on his heels from the first exchange, giving ground, his sword catching the cold air where the wolf had just been. That was when the mage moved. One of Gordon's men had drifted to the side of the ring, and I felt him begin to work, a freezing spell, the kind that locks a body mid-stride. He was aiming it at Zane's back, an honorable one-on-one duel, right up until the second the loser's friend decides to cheat. So I cheated first. I never stepped into the ring. I didn't need to. From the tree line, I ran out a single curse thread, the one I call interference, and I fed it into the shape of his spell as it formed. I have spent this whole second life reading other people's magic the way I once read code and rewriting it. His was a cheap little script with 1 weak line in it. I changed 1 character. The spell came apart in his hands and did nothing at all, and I watched him stare at his own fingers and mouth the word "why." By then, it was already finished. Zane ended it. I'll spare you the details. The duel closed the way Zane needed it to close, and the man who had broken his life did not rise again from the frost-gray grass. The body stayed where it fell. Nobody went near it. Zane lifted his head, and he howled. It came up out of him from somewhere under all the years in that collar, long and breaking, not triumphant so much as finally allowed. It wasn't a sound a winner makes. It was the sound of a man who has been carrying a weight so long he has forgotten it is heavy, and then, all at once, gets to set it down. His wife had a name he had never said out loud to me. His comrades had faces I would never see. He was giving them the only thing he had left to give, which was proof, at last, that someone had answered for them. The 8 behind him took it up one after another until the whole ridge rang with it. 9 throats aimed at a sky going pale. Dawn rose gold over the abandoned land while they sang their dead to rest, and I stood there in my small clay body, 50 centimeters of fired earth with no throat to add to theirs, and I let them have every second of it. Some grief you do not rush. I have rushed my own for 2 lifetimes now, and I know exactly what it costs to be hurried through it. When the last note thinned out into the trees, he turned and bowed his head to me. "Thank you for your aid, Lord Adrian." I didn't tell him I had tilted his honorable duel with a curse from the tree line, that his clean revenge had a small dishonest thread running through the middle of it that only I would ever see. He had earned the clean version. Some things a man should get to keep whole. The howl had also told every bandit within a mile exactly where we were. Losing a leader does not kill a mob. It only makes it stupid. Whatever was left of Gordon's men came up onto horses and drove for the forest edge to cut us off before we reached the deep trees. "Okay, that way." Brandon already had Gina up on his back. Colette scooped me under one arm like a sack of grain, which was about the dignity my situation allowed, and we ran. Wolves and elf blood both moved through a forest faster than anything on a horse, but the horses had open ground and they were trying to close the gap before the trees closed it for us. I had 1/10 of my mana left. I decided to spend it. Plumbline. It was a thing I had been building in my head. 2 magic spheres thrown a hair apart in speed and strung between them on a single curse thread, so the line snaps taut low across the ground. I laid it across the front rank of the horses. The thread caught legs at a gallop. I'll skip the pileup. Horses and riders went down in a tangle and stopped being a problem, and we were into the trees before the dust came back down. Then the world dimmed at the edges. "I'm out of mana," I told Colette. My voice was going slow and thick, shifting into sleep mode. "Take me to the dungeon core room, please. There is a specific fear in going dark while enemies are still behind you, in handing your whole helpless self to someone else and trusting them to run. In my old life, I had never once let anyone carry me. I had prided myself on it. Now, I had no choice, and the strange part was how little it frightened me." Colette's arm was already tightening around the clay before I finished the sentence. "The last thing I knew, and I don't feel things anymore, so new is the honest word, was that grip," and Brandon's voice somewhere overhead marveling that the horses had flown. Then the body went dark, and I went with it. I woke because the core had fed enough mana back into me to open my eyes, and the first thing I saw was 4 faces ringed above me in the blue light. Colette got there first. She had been crying, and she was not done. "How do I put it?" she started, and then it came out in a rush. That I acted like my own life was a thing I would throw away without noticing. That I was breezy about it. That it frightened her. She scolded me the way you only scold someone you have decided to keep. Zane bristled at her tone and stepped in to defend me, and made the mistake of introducing himself while he did it. "My name is Zane. I am Lord Adrian's first retainer." Colette rounded on him. She informed the werewolf, the #1 retainer, and he could be #2. From the back, one of the younger wolves announced to the whole room that the clay figure guy had made Big Sis cry. I let them argue over a ranking that didn't exist because it was the warmest sound I had heard in either of my lives. Then I told them the thing I'd decided somewhere back in that warehouse without admitting I had decided it. "Stay," I said. "All of you. This place has room, and it makes its own food and water off the core. Live here." I dressed it up as a staffing matter. A growing dungeon needs residents. Residents generate mana. Mana buys the things I am building toward. I laid it out flat, like a payroll decision, the cynic doing his sums out loud. Nobody was fooled. Colette pressed both hands over her mouth. Gina, who I had barely heard make a sound in 2 days, held the pendant to her chest. "Dungeon, I like it." Zane knelt again. "We were always a wandering people, accepted nowhere, drifting through the abandoned land." He bowed his head to the floor. "If you will let us live here, I will serve you with my life." I had spent one whole life being the man a company used up, and threw out the moment the numbers stopped working for it. Late nights, a monitor glowing at 3 in the morning, and then a shrug and a door. When I died the first time, nobody in that building noticed for a while. And here, in a hole in the ground, in a body I would not have chosen, I had built the exact opposite thing without ever deciding to. A place that could not fire you. A place nobody got to throw away for being born the wrong shape, or costing too much, or simply outliving your usefulness to someone with a ledger. I told myself it was staffing. I would keep telling myself that. It was easier to carry than the truth, which was that a starved wolf and a crying half-elf and 2 children who had been someone's property that morning were, as of tonight, the only thing in either of my lives that had ever felt like it belonged to me and would not leave. Then it's settled, I said, because if I said anything truer, I wasn't sure the clay wouldn't crack down the middle. Welcome home. After that, the dungeon stopped being a hole in the ground and started being a house. I used the core's building functions to shape it. A spring of clean water in the main hall, a stove that pulled its heat straight out of the stone. Colette and the others hauled up what furniture had survived their old ruined village, and the bare rock filled with tables and bedrolls and the ordinary clutter of people who actually live somewhere. The wolves got their own rooms. The 3 siblings got theirs. I made myself a room too and left it bare. I can't sleep, and I can't feel a mattress, so what would it have been for? The wolves turned up a projection tool we'd carried off from the camp, and I loaded it with a few harmless things pulled out of my old world memory. 9 grown werewolves sat watching moving pictures with their tails going like metronomes, and Zane's went fastest of all, and he pretended it didn't. I had come down here to farm mana. Instead, I had built a home and let it fill up with people who would not leave. Out past the walls, the guild that had written me off had not forgotten the dungeon it abandoned, and a red-haired knight was still somewhere in the dark, looking for a man who no longer existed. Those were tomorrow's problems. Tonight the hall was loud and warm and full, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, no one in it was disposable. The evolution felt like something I probably should not have enjoyed as much as I did. I had checked my own numbers first. The way you check a bank balance you already know is bad. Level 40, deep mana, a body. A stiff breeze could crack in half. I was 50 centimeters of fired clay held together by administrator privileges, and if I ever wanted to stop being carried around like luggage, that had to change. So I logged into the core, pulled up the evolution list, and spent. There were cheaper options. One looked like a walking corpse and stayed just as brittle. One was solid stone that would have doubled my weight, which meant doubling what Colette had to haul, which meant no. I took the little clay golem, commander tier. A small horn pushed up out of my forehead as the change rolled through me, and the whole thing washed over me in a wave that was, frankly, indecent. My body went sturdier, my reserves deeper. I came out the other side a slightly bigger doll with a horn and a brand new skill called transform. Naturally, I tested it by trying to turn my legs into a tank. I shaped my lower half into a pair of treads, which looked incredible and did absolutely nothing because treads need an engine and I had none. So I switched to wheels, lined up a curse ball behind me for thrust, and lit it. I crossed the room very fast and met the far wall face first. Ow, I said to no one, peeling myself off the stone. New body, same idiot driving it. Once I could move on my own without exploding, I asked Colette to show me where she came from. She led us out through the forest, me, Colette, Brandon, and Gina, to a cluster of wooden houses grown so far into the trees you could walk past and never see them. It should have been beautiful. Instead, the air had a wrongness to it, a thin residue I could taste through senses the clay didn't really have. Miasma, malignant mana, settled into the ground like rot. The elves left, Colette said, and her voice went careful. After a blue moon night. I asked what that was. She told me the moon over the abandoned land sometimes turned blue, and when it did, the monsters turned with it, hungrier, crueler, worse. One of those nights, something came through here. The elves ran. The beastmen who had fought for them were already sick from the miasma, too weak to keep up, so the elves left them behind. Brandon's ears went flat. They abandoned us, he said, and there was a whole childhood in the way he said it. Colette had stayed, a half-elf girl with a satchel of medicine, trying to hold back a poison she couldn't cure, watching the adults she couldn't save go one by one. She told it plainly, like a grocery list, which was somehow worse. I filed away those 2 words, Blue Moon Night, and the cold feeling that I had not heard the last of them. Then I told her to stop cleaning up other people's ruins alone. She teared up. I pretended not to notice. Inside, her old house was a wreck of dust and dried spider husks. Brandon started clearing it, spotted a small spider the length of a finger, and moved to squash it on principle. The spider webbed him to the floor before his hand came down. "How is that not an attack?" Brandon shouted, thoroughly bound. I told him to leave it. The spider was mine. It was Webster, the boss spider I'd swallowed back in the cave, reborn out of the core as an alpha of its own little line. And apparently, it had been busy. It strolled out the door with one leg raised like a salute, and a dozen more spiders peeled out of the shadows and filed after it. Survivors of that same bad night, under new management now. Gina made a face that could curdle milk. At the window, I found the reason to care about any of this. A stand of dying trees, leaves curled and browning under the miasma, and among them, unmistakable coffee. Real coffee. The same plant that used to keep me alive through the worst nights of a life I no longer had a body for. I couldn't drink a drop of it. No mouth, no throat, no anything. That only made me more determined to save the stupid trees. So I brought the whole forest under the dungeon. Colette, as the last person left in charge, agreed, and the village and its poisoned ground and its half-dead grove all became mine. Absorbing the miasma would take about a month, and every hour of it fed a slow trickle of mana back to the core. A ruin turned into income. Back home, 2 of the werewolf scouts came in torn up. One of them, Rufus, dropped straight to the floor and started snoring. I nearly panicked before another wolf explained, mildly, that werewolves just switch off the instant they hit empty. Rufus mumbled something about not being able to eat another bite and slept on. The scouts had found a shaft in the cave, a rough drop choked with vines that lashed at anything that came near. It didn't show up anywhere on the dungeon's map, which meant it might connect to another dungeon entirely. I decided to take a look. Colette, Brandon, and Gina all invited themselves along, and a steady older wolf named Gareth let us down. The vines were exactly as friendly as advertised. Colette offered to burn them out with Firebee. I said no at first. Fire underground means smoke, and smoke with nowhere to go means we all choke. Then I remembered I could just rebuild the room. I handed Brandon a small gray stone, a fragment of the dungeon core, and had him press it into the wall, where it woke up as a terminal. Suddenly, I could talk to the core from down there, like plugging into a network. I opened a vent in the ceiling and an intake hole beside the shaft. "Shall I?" Colette asked, already grinning. I told her to let it rip. She threw her Firebee down the shaft, and it bloomed into a swarm of drifting flame, and the whole drop lit up and drew its own smoke straight out through the hole. Then we sat down to wait for it to finish burning. It burned for hours. When the smoke finally thinned and we climbed down, the whole chamber was a graveyard of charred black vines. I ran my curse line over the biggest corpse and got a surprise. It had been an alpha man-eater, a hidden boss, undying, regenerating, the kind of thing that should have taken an army. I'd cooked it from above with one spell and never even seen its face. Brandon and Gina stood behind me, pinching their noses and tearing up at the stench, which rather undercut the drama. Then 2 figures came stumbling out of a side passage, arguing. A dwarf and a gnome, short, bearded, filthy, and very much alive. The dwarf gaped at the burnt vines and demanded to know who had torched the things, then squinted at me and asked flatly whether I was a golem. The 2 of them had been trapped down here by that plant for 10 years, bickering the entire time, and neither had strangled the other, which I respected. The dwarf was Dale. The gnome was Ernie, master blacksmith, master artisan, both exiled from homelands that never wanted them back, both now standing in a hole with nothing to their names. They asked to come live with us. I said no. Then they mentioned they could forge and build practically anything, and I reconsidered on the spot. Fine, I told them. You can stay, just don't cause trouble. 2 more strays for a house that was quietly turning into a town. I was starting to lose count. I wasn't there for the part that mattered most. I heard it later, in pieces, and even now, I can only tell it the way it was told to me. While I was pulling a dwarf out of a hole, a red-haired knight was standing in the middle of the guild hall in Ashford, refusing to leave. Her name was Julia. Weeks before, her party had walked into my dungeon, panicked, and run, and left one of their own behind to die. She had never accepted the story they came home with. Now she stood in front of the whole hall and demanded to know why the guild had written off the dungeon and everyone still inside it. Victor gave her the official version. He said I'd gone off recklessly, sprung a trap, and put the whole party in danger, and that leaving me was well within the unwritten rules adventurers live by. Smooth, reasonable, and a lie from the first word to the last. Julia's voice cut across the hall. Then I'll go back for him myself. That was when the doors came off. Her father came through them. Roland Greymore, guildmaster of the Ravensgate Guild, a top-tier adventurer the world knew as the Dragon Slayer, a mountain of a man with a great sword strapped across his back. He crossed the hall in 3 strides, took hold of Victor, and threw him clean through a wall. The branch chief, Giles, came sputtering out of his office, demanding to know who was brawling in his guild, and then saw who, and went the color of ash. Roland has a skill called the True Eye. It reads a lie the way you or I read a signpost. He turned it on the room, and he didn't raise his voice so much as let it fill every corner. "I can't stand liars," he said. "That goes for you too, Giles." He laid it out flat in front of everyone. That Victor's report was false. That Giles had taken bribes to bury the whole abandonment and let it quietly disappear. And then the part that reached all the way down into my dungeon and cracked something I'd stopped expecting anyone to fix. He turned to his daughter and told her the truth about the day, months back, when she'd nearly died. It hadn't been Victor who saved her that day. It had been me. Rally every adventurer in this town, Roland said. We launch a full assault on that dungeon. We are bringing him home. And that was where it stopped. No one arrested Victor. No one sentenced Giles. Victor crawled out of the rubble with wall dust in his hair, and his reputation cracked but not broken. Still talking, still slippery, still walking free. The lie had finally been dragged into the light, and the light was all it got. For the first time, the bill for what those people did to me was lying open on the table. Nobody had paid a single coin of it yet, but for one afternoon, in a room full of people who'd shrugged and moved on, someone said my name and meant it. I'd take it. It was more than I'd had in 2 lifetimes. Back home, none of us knew any of that yet. Zane came in from his rounds to find 2 new faces at the table and took the news of Dale and Ernie in stride. He even bent stiffly and apologized to Colette for being sharp with her. Old bad blood with elves, he admitted, that she'd never earned. Then he looked around the hall. The werewolves, the beastman kids, the half-elf, now a dwarf and a gnome. Every race the world had thrown out, gathered under one roof. And Zane decided he understood exactly what I was building. Our Lord means to raise a kingdom here, he announced, with the gravity of a man reading scripture. He reminded them all of the old story. The demon king who, long ago, united every race the gods had scorned and raised a great labyrinth to stand against heaven itself. The rebellion failed, the demon king fell, but the werewolves had never stopped honoring him, and they kept an old statue that Zane swore up and down wore my face. So they decided I was him, the demon king, come again. They swore themselves to me on the spot, dwarf and gnome and wolf alike, and they gave the whole enterprise a name, White Company, a nation, apparently, mine, apparently. Colette caught my eye across the hall. She alone had actually been standing next to me the day I said what I wanted, and what I'd said was that I would like a quiet, peaceful life somewhere. I think the meaning was a little different from that, she murmured, to nobody in particular. She wasn't wrong, but I let them have it, because a crown is a strange thing to argue over with a room full of people who love you. Besides, I had a more immediate problem. Word had reached me that adventurers were massing above, dozens of them, marching on the dungeon everyone had supposedly abandoned. They thought they were coming to rescue a dead man. I braced the walls and waited to see who came through them. The werewolf came down the tunnel at a run and gave me a number. More than 30, camped at the Raven's Gate mouth, tents pitched, torches lit, waiting for the sun. So the rescue had teeth after all. 30 of Ashford's finest, come to save a dead man out of the goodness of the guild's heart, and to walk off with my core while they were at it. I told everyone to stop what they were doing. The exploring could wait. The army at the door could not. The obvious move was to explain myself, open the gate, show them the man they came for was alive, thank them, send them home. I turned it over for about 2 seconds and dropped it. Even if they believed a talking clay doll, which was a stretch, the dungeon would end up under guild management by supper. I hadn't gathered every thrown away creature in the district, just to hand the roof over their heads to a committee. The other obvious move was to kill them. Colette lit up at that one. So we fight? She had her bow half off her shoulder already. Then we use the fire bees? We fight, I said. Nobody dies. She looked at me like I'd canceled her birthday. I laid it out. 50-odd bodies were more than we could beat in a straight line, so we wouldn't fight them in a straight line. We'd split them with the tunnels, drop them a few at a time, and take half of them alive. Dead adventurers meant the kingdom came next, and the next army wouldn't be a rescue. Live ones meant a table, and a table meant I could talk my way off it. Zane crossed his arms and allowed that taking men alive was the hard way to do anything. Then he allowed it was the right way, and that outnumbered as we were, we'd use every trick we had. Dale thumped a crate down between us and grinned through the beard. Ready? Course they're ready. Threw them together in a night. Masterwork anyway. Ernie sighed the sigh of a man who'd heard that sentence for 10 years. The crate held a single pressure plate, tuned to trigger under the weight of 1 coin. Dale and Ernie had built one. The dungeon would build the rest. I fed the plate into the wall, let the core read it down to the grain, and spent mana and iron ore to spit out copies. A floor's worth, then another floor's worth. Craft, not strength. It was the only way I'd ever won anything. The finishing touch took me the rest of the night. I booted the second build of Codex, the one I'd started calling the Professional Edition, because if I was going to die in a doll's body, I could at least name my tools nicely. Every terminal I'd pressed into the walls woke up at once. Search magic running off dungeon mana. A live picture of every tunnel painted across the white wall in front of me. The fortress could finally see. I couldn't leave the room and still watch the whole of it at once. That was the point. Then I counted what I had to defend it with, and the good mood went out of me. Titus. 50 spiders under Webster, each one a lot smaller and less impressive since the day I'd absorbed their boss. Against 2 upper rank parties and 4 or 5 lesser ones, that wasn't an army. That was a speed bump with legs. Gina tugged at my arm, or where an arm would be, and pointed at the wall. Hey, what's that? A man, alone, creeping the abandoned land tunnels, and a face I knew. The thief we'd once rolled up in a mat and questioned, scouting us. Zane was gone before I finished the thought, and back a minute later with the man bundled in a mat again. Brandon watched the whole thing and muttered that he, personally, hated being rolled up in a mat, and could everyone please keep that in mind. I asked the thief his name. He'd stopped fighting entirely. Vince, he said. Then the rest came out of him in a flat, tired rush. Sent ahead alone to scout, because he always drew the short straw. Used as a throwaway the day the spiders caught him. And now his own gang meant to hit us and kill the children in the camp. And he was finished. Done. Would we please just kill him and have it over with? I looked at a man the world had used up and pitched at my door. I knew the feeling better than he did. Vince. I let the name sit a beat. Any interest in being useful to us instead? I wasn't at the mouth for what came next. I pieced it together afterward, off the screens and out of what people said later, and it went like this. By morning, the 30 had become 50. Roland Graymore stood in front of them with that voice you could hang a bell in and gave them the official story. Secure the core for the guild. Get the green ranks some raid experience, now that the last 2 expeditions had cost the guild so much. All true, all beside the point. Beside him stood a woman I'd only ever heard named, Stella Ford, high rank, the Mage Guild's agent for the whole region, the one they called the Ice Witch. She backed the official reasons in a cool carrying voice, then leaned in close to Roland and said something quieter, about a debt, and about how she knew perfectly well he hadn't rallied a town over one missing low-rank boy. There was another reason, she told him, wasn't there? He told her he had no idea what she meant. He was lying, and she knew it, and neither of them seemed to mind. The advance party formed up under Victor and Edgar's high-rank group, and there, red hair, a knight's set to her shoulders, was Julia, stepping in with the front line. Her father caught her arm and told her, gruff, that the boy had better odds than she feared. He'd once spent months at the bottom of a worse hole than this, and walked out of it. Julia gave him a daughter's flat look and said only he was that kind of monster. Then she turned and walked into my dungeon to find a man she thought was dying somewhere inside it. She was 10 days too late to save me, and right on time to be betrayed. She just didn't know the second part yet. On the screens, I watched them come. Victor took the front with a torch, going on his memory of a layout he'd helped map the day he left me down here. Edgar sent his mage, Lyle, ahead to sweep for traps. Lyle ran his detection, found everything exactly as the guild's notes promised, and reported all clear. He was reading a map I'd already redrawn under his feet. They cut down the few monsters that wandered into them and kept talking. Victor griped about the guildmaster, about his back, about how a good party had fallen apart on him once through no fault of his own. Edgar talked money, and about how they'd both be clear of Ashford soon, with their pockets full. Then Edgar said the thing that changed the night. He said, in the easy tone of a man who'd done it before, that a dungeon this size was a convenient place for people to go missing. A binding spell from behind. No one the wiser. He was talking about Julia. Settle an old score through the guildmaster's daughter, he added, and walk out clean. And once she was dealt with, he thought he'd enjoy taking that stuck-up mage Stella down a peg too. At the back of their little line, Julia walked in silence, guarding a grudge of her own. She'd never once believed their story about me, and it turned out she had no idea the men in front of her had just scheduled her disappearance for later that same night. I sat in my bright, quiet room, 60 centimeters of clay, and felt something cold click into place and decide itself. The terminals didn't just watch. Each one, a body crossed, read the body and threw its measure up on my wall, a trick I'd taken to calling status, second version. Edgar was the strongest of the 3, Victor the weakest. Julia sat between them, and now she was walking point in a trap laid by both. Colette had gone quiet at my side. Those people are planning something ugly. Yes. Is it true, though, that she left you? She wouldn't look away from Julia's little moving marker. Maybe there was a reason she couldn't come. I didn't answer that. I filed it. The way you flag a line of code you don't have time to fix, but can't quite bring yourself to delete. Later, maybe. Instead, I gave the orders. Zane, Webster, Titus, a werewolf spear, the bearded brothers on the trap mechanisms, and Vince out front as bait. 2 nets, 1 night. Split them, drop them, take them breathing. What I didn't know yet, what I only stitched together after, was that I wasn't the only one hunting Edgar in the dark. Roland had suspected the man for weeks and couldn't prove a thing, so he'd done a cold, clean, terrible thing. He'd let his own daughter walk in as frontline bait, betting Edgar wouldn't resist the opening, because catching the man in the act was the only way he'd ever catch him at all. 2 of us, that night, spent Julia to trap the same man. I've never quite decided which of us it says worse things about. Brandon leaned over to Gina and whispered that Big Bro was scary sometimes. Gina nodded, slow, and didn't argue the point. Vince earned his place inside the hour. He met his old gang on the abandoned land side, the new boss, and 20 men, all of them still sore about a beating from a month back they'd never gotten to answer for. Vince spun them a warm little story. The werewolves had caroused till the dead of night and were sleeping it off like the dead. There was an elf girl in the camp. Easy loot, easy prisoners, this way, gentlemen. The new boss liked the sound of a slave pack gone soft, and liked the sound of an elf to sell even better. 20 greedy men filed after Vince, down a side path he'd picked out for them, and by his own account, later he felt not one flicker of guilt as he led them. They poured into a room expecting sleeping dogs, and found a wall of armed adventurers instead. The raid's own front rank, funneled in from the far side. Vince slipped out through a gap in the stone. The gap closed behind him and stopped being a gap. 2 nets, and I'd just tied their throats to the same knot. Titus met the adventurers in the Great Hall and did what 3 meters of walking stone does. They gave a good account of themselves. One came in with a flourish and a shout, some moonlight crescent slash, and bounced off Titus and straight down a pit that hadn't been in the floor a breath before. His friend charged in to avenge him and went down the next one. The pressure plates did the sorting. The shifting roots did the herding. Dale and Ernie sat on the triggers like 2 men playing one organ. A minion's voice cracked over the line that Titus was taking a beating. "He's fine," I said. "They can all be revived off the core. We're a white company. We bring people back properly." I meant it as a joke, and it came out mostly true. Above the falling men, where nobody thinks to look, Webster and his spiders lifted the downed ones off the stone and tipped them quietly into the dark, neat as posting letters. Nobody died in that hall. They just stopped being upright, one after another, until the great raid on the living dungeon was mostly a lot of surprised people sliding gently downward. Everything the trap swallowed slid down into the dark where the werewolves were waiting. Down there, a thief who'd landed beside a stunned adventurer decided to make the day worse and reached for a knife. He didn't get to use it. Shapes came out of the black and took them both, thief and adventurer alike, without a killing blow between them. And while they worked, the werewolves performed. They'd grown fond of an old play about loyal retainers avenging their lord, and they bellowed the lines as they bundled the catch-up. "Welcome to the Great Hall. Guards, come forth, seize the scoundrel." The men they were trussing had once buckled the collars these werewolves used to wear. I let them have the theater. They'd earned a bad joke or 2. The catch went down to the lowest fields, the ones I'd stocked with the modified man-eaters. I'd reworked the things so they didn't eat. They held a body still and drew off its energy in a slow trickle, a skill in place of a mouth, and turned my prisoners into a quiet, breathing, renewable supply of mana. Nobody hungry, nobody dead. Just 50 rescuers and 20 thieves, filed neatly into the cellar, paying their rent. Brandon watched the fields fill up on the screen and told me, low, that it was brutal. It was. I brushed it off, the way I'd taught myself to, and told myself again that no one down there was dying. Some nights, that's the whole of the mercy a man can afford. Edgar peeled his little group off the raid route, and Julia felt it before she understood it. She said out loud that this wasn't the way to the core. She was right, and being right didn't help her. Lyle turned and spoke a shadow spell at her back, an ugly crawling thing that poured up out of the floor and pinned her where she stood. She fought it. It only pulled tighter and dragged a fog across her thinking, so she couldn't hold a clear thought long enough to shape a spell of her own. Edgar didn't even trouble to sound sorry. He told her, in that bored way of his, that this one had business with her, that it was orders, and then he took Lyle and left to go find Stella, leaving Victor alone in the torchlight with a woman who couldn't move. Victor pretended for a moment he'd only taken a wrong turn. Then he stopped pretending. He loomed over her, and the truth came stumbling out of him. half a threat and half some strangled resentment, that she'd always looked down on him and always taken the better man's side, and that here at last was a dark deep enough to make her pay for it. Julia got his name out through the fog, once, like a curse. He leaned in. He never touched her. A small voice said 2 words out of the dark. Curse ball, and the tunnel filled with them. I'd carried 5 of these once, back when I was 50 centimeters of nervous clay. I had 14 now, and I threw everyone. They came off me in a stream, curse after curse after curse, and each of them found Victor's face. He got out half a startled word, one hand thrown up, half a step back, some panicked guess about a golem, and then the barrage took him clean off his feet and out of the conversation for good. Down he went. All that armor, all that swagger, folded up on the stone like a dropped coat. I want to be honest about how long I stood over him. Longer than I needed to. This was the man who'd told the lie, who'd stood in a guild hall and sworn the code did it, that the dungeon had abandoned me and not the people I'd bled beside, who'd walked me down here 10 days ago and left me to die in the dark, and then had the gall to come back down into that same dark to hurt the one person who'd ever tried to stand up for me. And I'd put him on the floor with a doll's toy and a flick of thought. No duel, no speech. He didn't even get to finish his sentence. Webster came down the wall right on cue, hooked the folded shape of him up in its legs, and dragged him to the lip of a hole I'd opened for exactly this. Trash to the bin. I watched Victor go over the edge and down into it, and I felt the first clean thing I'd felt in a long, long while. Not joy. Something quieter and colder than that, and entirely mine. Then I made myself turn away from the hole, because the hole was never the reason I'd come. Julia was still pinned, still fogged, staring at a talking clay figure with no notion of what she was looking at. I spun a thread out of myself, the non-physical kind, the part of me that reads magic the way other people read text, and touched it to the shadow binding her. It opened in front of me, plain as anything I'd ever written. Somebody else's spell, laid bare like code. I found where it gripped her, rewrote the one line that held it shut, and told the thing to let go. The shadows drained back into the floor. Julia gasped, flinched for a pain that never came, and found her arms moved when she asked them to. Easy, I told her. The numbness takes a while to wear off. Rest. She stared at the little clay thing that had just saved her life for the second time without her ever once knowing it was me. You saved me? Just a passing clay figure, I said, and left it there. I'd have gotten clean away if the ice witch had only stayed lost. Stella Ford came around the corner hunting Julia and found her safe against the wall, and then she found me. I caught the exact moment her eyes slid off the rescued knight she'd come all this way for and locked onto the small horned clay thing standing in the torchlight. I did the only thing I could think of. I played dumb. I wobbled from foot to foot, side to side, a harmless little dungeon curio doing a harmless little dance. Nothing here worth a mage's attention. Move along, move along. It did not work. It worked hard in the wrong direction. The feared high-rank mage, the woman 2 guilds jumped to please, pressed her hands together, and made a sound I can only describe as a squeal, and asked the darling little golem whether it might not like to be hers. She promised, breathless, that she'd treat it ever so well. I kept dancing and thought with real dread that I'd just traded one kind of trouble for a stickier one. Up at the mouth, the bad news reached the worst possible man. A green adventurer came running to Roland with a head count that wouldn't add up. A considerable number of the raiders, he stammered, had gone into the dungeon and simply not come back out. Missing. Dozens of them. Roland heard the word missing and stopped caring about experience and core samples. Edgar would be fine, he judged. And Stella too. Those 2 could look after themselves. It was everyone else vanishing that turned his face to stone. He'd underestimated the place. A living dungeon that quietly swallowed a raid was not a training exercise. It was a monster with a full belly and room for more. So the Dragon Slayer handed the guild to a boy who'd never commanded anything, told him to hold the entrance, and went in alone to find the core and break it. I didn't know a scrap of that yet. I was still down in a dark tunnel, doing a little dance for a woman who wanted to adopt me, feeling pretty good about a betrayer at the bottom of a hole. I'd knocked down the man who left me to die. I'd pulled his victim out of the dark, and for about 10 minutes there, it honestly felt like the bill was finally getting paid. It wasn't. Not the half of it. The strongest man in Ashford was already coming down the stairs to smash the one thing I couldn't live without, and he was bringing every good reason he had along with him. They'd sent 50 people to rescue a dead man. Now, they were sending the Dragon Slayer to kill whatever it was they'd found instead. They had sent the Dragon Slayer to finish what 50 men could not. I slipped away from the Ice Witch through a seam too tight for her to follow. folded myself into a service passage, and pressed a stub of clay to the wall terminal. The core's log bloomed in the dark. I read the intruder's readout twice, because the first time I was sure the numbers were broken. Roland Graymore, special class. One of only 5 in the whole kingdom. The man they called Dragon Slayer because he had once walked up a mountain and come back down without the dragon. His skill list ran longer than my arm. Wind, body, quickness, endurance, high-speed recovery, combat skill. A dozen more stacked under them, and near the bottom sat the one that mattered. True Eye. It saw through traps. It saw through illusion. It saw through every clever thing I had spent 10 days building. Because every clever thing I had built was a trap dressed as scenery, and this man could read the scenery. Brandon's voice cracked across the line. Someone was coming, fast. Colette had gone to head him off, and he thought it had already gone wrong. It had. My whole arsenal, every pit and plate and thread, might not add up to one honest blow against this one man, and he was walking straight for the core, which meant he was walking straight for the thing that was now my life. I told Brandon to stay put in the command room. I'll go myself, I said, and I transformed. I kept one eye on the command feed as I ran, and the feed showed me exactly how bad it was. Colette was up on the high catwalk in the last defense zone, wrapped in a black hooded cloak so the shadows would hold her. She had the shot of her life lined up. She loosed. The arrow crossed the whole cavity clean and true, and the giant plucked it out of the air with 2 fingers without breaking stride. He was over 2 meters of muscle and burnished plate, greatsword riding his back, and he moved like the traps weren't there at all. Colette yanked the trigger cord. The ceiling let go, a whole rack of stalactites dropping into a curtain of dust and stone. When the dust thinned, he was simply somewhere else. The catwalk shrieked and folded, and then he had her off her feet by the collar of that cloak, holding her the way you hold a kitten by the scruff. He didn't hurt her. He looked her over, set her down, and asked her who she was. Mildly, like a man who'd expected a soldier and found a child playing at one. On the feed, I watched her legs shake. I watched her mouth the word weak to herself, hating it. 24. That was all the raid had left up top. His 50 had bled down to about 20 in my tunnels, and none of it mattered because the one who counted had already brushed my whole defense aside and found the hidden door to the hall. I opened the throttle and burned toward them. The shortcut spat me toward the hall as a streamlined rocket of red clay, nose first, faster than anything my little body could run. Ahead of me, the dark went white. A flare of light bloomed up the passage mouth, bright enough that I flinched inside a clay skull that had no eyes to shut. I threw out curse threads, caught the ceiling, and let them snap me down from a killing speed to a swing. I hung there, upside down under the dome, and I looked at what my dungeon had become. There was a cat in my hall, a silver cat the size of a wagon, 4 meters at the shoulder, maybe 5, its fur throwing back the light like water. Its eyes were 2 lamps of molten gold, and it had the Dragon Slayer. It had him the way a house cat has a ball of yarn. One great paw swatted him across the floor. Before he stopped tumbling, the other paw hooked him back. He crashed off a pillar, off the wall, off the stone, and every time he found his feet, the cat batted him spinning again, playful, delighted, utterly gentle in the way that only something enormous can be cruel by accident. The man who no trap could touch, the man who caught arrows out of the sky, bounced around my hall like a toy in a flood. He wasn't losing because he was outfought. He was losing because he could not make himself hit her. I could see it even from the ceiling, the greatsword still on his back, his fists still closed. A legend who slew dragons refusing to draw on something the shape of a house pet. So he covered, and he rolled, and he took another swat that folded him over a broken slab, and the cat chirped down at him, thrilled with the game. I knew that light. I knew whose it was before my mind would say it. Down below, small and safe against a fallen slab, Colette was staring up with her hood knocked back, and past her, where the girl had been standing, there was only the cat, Gina, the quiet one, the near silent little thing who watched the monitors and nodded along and never asked for anything. Her mother's fang pendant had flared and unfolded her into this. She had seen a stranger lift her big sister by the throat, and something in her had simply said no. Her voice reached me thin under all that thunder. You picked on big sister, and then the cat sent Roland Graymore cartwheeling into the far wall again, purring the whole time. For one whole breath, I let myself enjoy it. Then I remembered a giant cat, and a cornered legend in the same room was not a solution. It was a bigger problem waiting to land. I dropped to the floor on my threads and made myself as loud as a 60-centimeter doll can be. Gina, I called up. Stop it, put him down. The golden eyes swung to me. The tail went up, and the cat, delighted to have a new small thing to play with, forgot the Dragon Slayer entirely and came for me at a bound that shook grit off the ceiling. I ran. There is no dignity in imagine what I did next. I threw myself into a roller dash and fled across my own hall from a house pet, threads flailing, a horned lump of clay outpaced by Joy on 4 legs. She was 2 strides from batting me into next week when Brandon stepped out of the passage and planted himself square in front of her. He didn't shout. He just stood there, dog ears flat, arms crossed, small and furious in the shadow of a thing that could have swallowed him. The cat skidded to a stop, ears folding, and looked down at him like a child caught with the jam. The light folded back the way it had come. Where the cat had been, Gina stood again, small, silver-haired, barefoot, the pendant dull at her throat, with her shoulders up around her ears, and the most sorry look I have ever seen on a face. Brandon let out a long breath and scooped her up before she could bolt. "I told you not to do that again," he muttered into her hair, half scold, half relief. And things were finally starting to go good. I sent the 3 of them back. Colette wanted to argue it. She'd failed on the catwalk and it was eating her. But I put an edge on my voice and told her the command room needed eyes more than the hall needed archers. And she went, hood in her fist, Brandon carrying Gina. All of them out through the passage before the man in the middle of my floor got up, because he was getting up. Roland Graymore rolled to his knees in a spreading mess of his own blood, and then he stood, swaying, and spat red onto my nice stone. He wiped his mouth. He looked at the empty air where a 5-meter cat had just used him for a toy, and he told me, flatly, that I shouldn't get comfortable. He hadn't shown his true strength yet. He hadn't gone anywhere near all out, bleeding from a dozen places, one arm hanging wrong, and he meant every word of it. That was when I understood the cat had bought me a conversation, not a victory. So I talked. I planted my little clay body between him and the hidden door, and I told him what I wanted, plainly. It didn't matter who I was. What I wanted was for him to turn around and walk his people out of my dungeon. In exchange, I'd give him back every adventurer I'd taken, alive, all of them. That reached him where the cat couldn't. He went still. He'd come here for the missing, he said. His 50 had walked into my tunnels and stopped coming out. And a guildmaster does not leave his people underground. He had come to break the core because a broken core means a dead dungeon, and a dead dungeon gives its prisoners back. If I stood between him and that, injured or not, cat or not, he would go through me. I believed him. That was the trouble. I could feel the core at my back like a second heartbeat, the one thing in this world I could not afford to let him reach. And standing over it was a doll he could crush in one hand the moment threats stopped working. I had exactly 1 card left that he hadn't already seen. It wasn't a weapon, it was a name. Footsteps came running up the passage before I could play it. The Ice Witch swept in first, silver hair and midnight coat, took one look at the state of her guildmaster and threw up her hands. He was a wreck. Had the little clay thing really done this to him? Then she caught herself and remembered her news, and it came out of her in a bright rush. Never mind that. They'd found him. They'd finally found Adrian. And behind her came Julia. Red hair, amber eyes. That dented armor she'd worn into my dungeon looking for a dead man. She stopped a few steps in and stared at me. Not past me, at me. At the 60-centimeter horned doll standing guard over a hole in the floor. I watched the thought try to form on her face and fail over and over because it was absurd. Because it could not be. Because how? Her mouth moved. It couldn't really be him, could it? I let the hall go quiet. I let them all look at the clay figure they'd been stepping over and around and past this whole raid. The monster, the demon king, the thing they'd come to kill. Then I stepped forward, and I said it in a voice I made sure carried to every corner of that hall. I am Adrian, the low-rank mage your guild left in the wall to die. That's who's been running this dungeon. Nobody breathed. I had run this moment 100 ways in the dark of the wall, back when I had no hands and no voice, back when the only thing I could do was make a cursor blink, hello, world, and watch it run. In every version, I was still the disposable one, still explaining, still begging some part of the world to believe I hadn't deserved it. In not one of them did an entire hall go silent because I said my own name. I stood in that silence and let it stretch as long as I wanted, because for the first time in 10 days, there was no one left who could tell me to be quiet. For one paragraph, the world was not mine. Julia's mind simply refused it. The doll, the voice, the name she'd been screaming into these tunnels for 10 days, all snapping together into a shape too cruel and too kind to hold. Her knees didn't buckle so much as forget their job. The Ice Witch's teasing dropped clean off her face, and Roland, bleeding, one hand still half raised toward the core, looked at the thing he'd come to destroy and understood he'd very nearly killed the man his own people had come to save. Then the moment ended, and it was my hall again, and I was a clay doll standing in a ring of stunned people who had, every one of them, written me off as gone. I had spent 10 days being the thing under the floor. It was very good to say my own name out loud. We did the rest of it sitting down, which surprised them more than the cat had. I put them at a table in a real room with real chairs and let them take in who else lived down here. Colette pouring, Zane standing at my shoulder like a war banner, Dale and Ernie already halfway into their cups. Ernie had made coffee. Roland tasted it, winced at how bitter it was, and the old gnome cackled and told him that was the point. Julia couldn't hold it in. The words spilled out of her before she'd even sat all the way down. A stone golem had caught her across the head that day. Her sight had gone white. By the time she'd surfaced, the party was already telling their story. She hadn't left me. She had never left me. I let that sit where it landed and didn't pick it up. Not yet. Some bills you don't collect at the table. Then I told them the plain truth, because plain was all that would work now. The dungeon had swallowed me alive and made me its familiar. I was tied to the core the way they were tied to their own hearts, and to stand up again with a real body, I needed mana. A great deal of it, near 100,000. Yes, I'd taken a little from the men in the lower fields. No, I hadn't killed a single one. Every prisoner he'd come for was breathing, and would keep breathing. Roland asked me, straight, what I actually wanted. So I laid out 3 things. 1. Let my dungeon stand as a forward base for anyone pushing into the abandoned land. That ruin-choked country past the mountains no expedition could supply. 2. Access to the deeper dungeon under this one. Dale thumped the table and swore his people had mined it 10 years and never touched bottom. Mithril and magic stones without end, split fairly, and I'd take the smaller share since I had the fewer mouths. 3. A training ground. Green adventurers died for lack of anywhere safe to bleed a little and learn. I had a whole dungeon that could put men in pits and lift them out again alive. Send me your rookies. I'll send them home tougher. I watched him do the arithmetic, march an army in to take the place, and he'd hold the road but gain a corpse of a dungeon. Shake my hand, and he'd hold the road and everything the road led to. He's a hard man, but not a stupid one. You've got a deal, he said, and put out his hand. I extended a clay arm across the table to meet it, stretched it, honestly, a good deal further than an arm should go, and watched a dragon slayer's face curdle at having to shake hands with a doll. That was when the ice witch chose to blow the whole thing up. She slid in front of the handshake, all silk, and named her price. Peace was fine. Trade was fine. But the little clay wonder, the magic that ran all this, that was hers. She wanted to keep me. Make me your pet, Adrian, she purred. That's my condition. Colette nearly dropped the pot. Adrian is our boss, she snapped, planting herself at my side. He is not becoming anybody's pet. I let them squabble for exactly as long as it was funny, then offered the witch the only thing that would actually move her, my research. The workings of the core, the read and write of living magic, notes no mage guild had ever seen. Her whole face changed. The pet demand evaporated. She took the data with the greedy little smile of someone who thinks she's robbed you, and never once noticed I'd handed her the shell of a thing and kept the yolk, because that was the shape of the whole deal in the end. I gave them the road. I gave them the ore. I gave them the training ground and a stack of secrets. I gave them access to everything. I did not give them the core. That stayed mine, under my floor, under my hand. They got a partner. They did not get an owner. The men who had thrown me away had just signed themselves into needing me, and they walked out of that room thinking they'd won. I'm not sure what that made me. I could have crushed the deal and let Roland bleed on my floor. Instead, I fed the guild that buried me, made it rich, made it safe, made it lean on my road and my ore, and my mercy for everything it wanted next. Kindness, maybe. Or the longer, colder kind of revenge. The sort where you don't break the people who wronged you. You make them depend on you, and then you smile, and then you keep the receipt. Sitting there with a clay hand still stretched across the table. I honestly couldn't have told you which one I was doing. I'm not sure it mattered. The result was the same either way. I kept my word before the ink was dry. Zane went down to the fields and started walking the prisoners out, the whole missing 50, the thieves with them, blinking and unsteady and very much alive, up toward a sky they'd stopped expecting to see. Roland walked the line himself, counting faces, and I watched something in his shoulders come down that had been up since he entered my dungeon. Zane stayed close to him the whole way, and near the top, he said the part I hadn't asked him to say. If Roland ever broke faith with our lord, the White Company would follow him to the ends of hell and cut him down, every last one of them, and count it a good death. He said it kindly. That was what unsettled the big man most, a band of freed slaves who'd found a king in a clay doll, and meant every word about dying for him. I didn't have to be told what Roland was thinking as he climbed out. A guildmaster whose last master of this guild, Giles, had turned out to be a thief and a forger, and was rotting in a cell for it. And here, 10 days after being left for dead in a wall, that guild's discarded nobody was already a lord with an army and a road and a mine. 10 days. You could see him trying to make the number make sense. I let him go. I had the core. I had my people. I had assigned peace with the men who'd buried me, and every one of them was now leaning on the very thing they'd thrown out. It should have felt like the bill was paid. It wasn't. Not even close. Somewhere up that tunnel, Victor was still breathing in a hole, and the ones who gave the order were still walking around free. And the man I used to be was still owed a great deal more than one good handshake in the dark. The guild had crawled back to me on its knees without knowing that was what it was doing. That was a start. It was a long way from finished. And out past the mountains, in the country full of ruins we just promised to open, something older than any of us had begun, very slowly, to wake up. 10 days after I called off a war, I opened an inn, not a metaphor, an actual inn, built into the mouth of my own dungeon, with rooms and a front desk and a price on a board. I kept the walls dark stone and the lanterns low, because adventurers pay for atmosphere, and I was, whatever else had happened to me, still running a business. I hauled the furniture up from Ashford. I laid the floors, or rather a crew of clay did it, while I stood in my 60-centimeter body and pointed. The sign was Colette's doing. She painted it without asking and hung it over the door before I could stop her. In White Company, it said, in careful green letters, 80 gold a night. I stood under it and read it twice. In this world, nobody knew what a White Company was. There was no word here for a workplace that didn't grind you down to nothing, because there was no need for the opposite word either. They didn't have the black kind to name it against. I had. I'd had the black kind so thoroughly that it killed me at a desk, and I woke up as a doll inside a wall. So I let the sign stay. I told myself it was because repainting was a waste of mana. That was a lie, and I knew it. The truth was that I had spent one whole life being used up by a company that took everything and gave back nothing. And now I owned the other kind, the fair kind, the kind that fed the people who worked for it and let them go home at the end. If I was going to be a monster in a hole, I was going to be the good sort of monster, the sort I'd never once gotten to work for. Hello, world, I thought, looking up at the green letters. It compiled. Then the staffing began, and the sentiment died fast. Julia arrived before I'd even posted the job. She marched in, planted herself behind the empty front desk like she'd always owned it, and informed me that if I truly insisted, she supposed she could work as the clerk. I hadn't insisted. I hadn't said anything at all. Don't misunderstand, she added, and then went and recruited half the young women adventurers in Ashford as part-timers by dinner. I decided not to misunderstand. Dale and Ernie claimed the shopfront by the entrance for a forge and a tool stall. 10 years, Dale kept booming, already swinging a hammer. 10 years since I had a proper anvil, so I let him swing. Colette wanted a potion counter, and got one until the third shattered bottle, at which point I quietly reassigned Gina from handling potions to standing in the lobby as a mascot, with Brandon posted beside her to keep the little silver menace from eating the display fish. Gina, small and gray and four-legged just then, was already chasing one such fish across the flagstones as I made the decision. I kept a ledger. That was the whole point of the inn, under the atmosphere and the green sign. Every adventurer who walked my halls, fought my monsters, and slept in my beds left a little mana behind, and the core drank it. I was under 5,000. A real body, the human kind, with hands that could hold a cup, cost 100,000. At 300 a day, I would get there in under a year. I could wait a year. I had waited longer for worse. Word came up from Ashford that same week, and it was about Victor. They had let him out. The man who sealed me into a wall and walked away whistling had healed enough to stand, and they released him. And the interesting part was where he went. Not away, not into hiding. Julia found him on her way through the treatment center and stopped him at the door. Whatever she braced for, she didn't get it. No sneer, no threat. He told her, plainly, that he had been wrong and would not do it again, and that there was something he had to go and do now. Then he said the last part, the part she repeated to me later with an odd look on her face. He was doing it for the sake of our Lord. Our Lord. That was the phrase my own warriors used, down in the dark. the ones who had spent these 10 days quietly folding captured men into the ranks and teaching them whose house they lived in now. Somewhere while I was busy hanging a sign, Victor had stopped being my enemy and become my staff. Nobody sentenced him. No one so much as locked him up. He had simply been broken and set down facing a new direction, and now he walked around a free man running my errands and calling me Lord. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I felt like a man who had found a use for a thing he'd meant to throw away. It was colder than revenge, and it lasted longer, and it was nowhere near the whole bill. Victor was one name. The men who gave the orders still slept easy, but it was a start, and I could live with a start. The guildmaster came back a few days into it. Roland Graymore filled my doorway the way a wardrobe fills a doorway, ducked under Colette's sign, and told me the rumor problem was handled. The raid, the 50 missing men, all of it. He had folded into a tidy story about bandits and a collapsed tunnel. As far as the kingdom knew, nothing worth a second glance had happened here. Good, I told him. Keep it that way. Then he told me he had brought me a branch office and a branch chief. Her name was Stella Ford, the ice witch of the Mage Guild, and she swept in behind him all in silver frost blue and looked at me the way a collector looks at something behind glass. She introduced herself with perfect formality. Branch chief of the new dungeon outpost, Mage Guild liaison, here for cooperative research. All very official. Then she crouched down to my height, took my clay hand to shake it, and completely lost her composure. She went pink. She made a sound I will not attempt to spell. She held on a beat too long and murmured something about the texture that I am choosing not to record. She's staying, Roland said, already turning to go, in the exact tone of a man handing off a problem. Colette stepped between us and folded her arms. Stella straightened and smiled as though none of that had occurred. I looked at the woman who would now be living in my dungeon, studying my magic, at all hours, and felt my quiet, slow life slide one more step toward the horizon. Colette had asked me to teach her. She asked up on the new observatory I had carved into the mountain, the one that looks out over the abandoned land and its great dead crater, right after I finished scolding her for moping about being weak. Take me as your disciple, she said. Teach me magic. So I sighed and took on one more job I did not need, and built her a training room with reinforced walls and plenty of room to fail in. My own magic was closed to her. It runs on a skill called phantom sight, a thing most people would call a curse, and she doesn't have it. So chanting magic it was, the ordinary kind, old words that work whether or not the speaker understands them. Stella assisted, which delighted no one except Stella. Colette shot her a narrow look and announced that she was 20 years old and perfectly capable. Thank you. That stopped me cold. She looked about 15, and I had been treating her like a kid sister this whole time. Fine. 20. I told her to compress her mana and speak the fire chant, slow. She spoke it, and the room went white. It wasn't a spell. A spell has a shape and an edge. This was a wall of flame that came up out of her like something answering a door, far more than the small chant deserved, and it hit the reinforced stone and rolled back on itself with a roar. Stella had a barrier of frost raised before I finished flinching. Through it, I watched Colette stand inside her own fire, eyes huge, not burning, not steering any of it. There's something in her, Stella said, very low. Something else is holding the mana. She was right, and I had missed it. 10 days of ledgers and green signs, and I hadn't looked closely enough at my own disciple. That one was mine to own. Whatever rode her sat somewhere no spell from outside could touch, down in the place where she ended and it began, and there was exactly one road in. I told her to hold still and not to fight me, whatever she felt. Then I spun a curse thread thin as a breath, pushed it down the link between us, and dove headfirst into my disciple's mind. I came up standing in a place with no floor and no sky, only fire, and I looked down and saw my own hands, human hands, 5 pale fingers on each, the hands I died with. I hadn't seen them in a very long time, and I didn't get to enjoy it because the fire in front of me gathered itself up and stood. It was tall as a tower, a giant of living flame, roughly the shape of a person and nothing like one, with 2 burning hollows where a face should go. And it looked at me the way you would look at an ant that had wandered into your kitchen. Then it drew breath, if a fire breathes, and emptied everything it had at me in one white roar. It should have finished me. In her own mind, she held every advantage, and the thing wearing her fire could have crushed a trespasser like a passing thought. It hit me full on. I stood in it and let it wash over the borrowed human shape, and I made myself yawn. Was that it? I asked. Did you do something just now? The fire stopped like a held breath. Why aren't you burning? The giant demanded, and there was something almost offended in it. I told it, truthfully, that next to a few fires I had already lived through, This was nothing. It stared. Then understanding moved through the flame, and it said quietly that I was not from this world at all. And with that, all of that towering fire folded inward and shrank until what hung in the air in front of me was a small figure the size of my hand. A fairy with fine amber insect wings, arms crossed, glaring. She told me her name was Diana, one of the 4 demon saints, she said, 1,000 years old even in this ridiculous little shape. She had served the demon king, a being named Ruinvale, and then she told me the thing that rearranged the whole world inside my head. Ruinvale had not been the monster the stories sold. He was the one who invented magic and handed it to every race that used it now, and the winners had painted him a villain afterward. The chanting magic Colette struggled with, the spirit magic the elves guarded, all of it ran downhill from him. Long ago, the elves had sealed Diana into the line of their spirit priestesses, and that line had run down, mother to daughter, until it reached a half-elf girl whose blood held the seal too loosely to keep the fire quiet. I asked her the blunt question, did she hate the girl she was locked inside? For a moment, the little fairy didn't answer, and this is the one part I will tell from her side, because I watched it move across her face. 1,000 years is a long time to be sealed in the dark and passed hand to hand through strangers. And then one of those strangers is finally born where you can see her, and she grows up in front of you, laughing, skinning her knees, calling out in her sleep, and you cannot touch her or speak one word to her, but you are there for every single day of it. By the time Diana answered, she wasn't glaring anymore. Colette is like a daughter to me, she said. I have watched her since the day she was born. The seal kept her from teaching the girl anything, she went on, and her own old anger kept fouling the chanting magic, which was why the fire kept breaking loose. So I offered her a deal. I had a device, a thing I call the Codex Agent, that could route spirit magic clean around the seal, so she could teach Colette the magic she herself had invented, the right way, safely. And then I told her she didn't have to stay in here to do it. My curse thread ran both directions. She could simply come out. She hadn't known that was possible. She was still saying so when I took hold of her and pulled us both up the thread and out. I woke in my clay body on the training room floor, with Colette's face far too close to it, and Stella's right behind hers. Master, are you all right? Colette asked. I told her I was fine, and that we had had a guest the entire time. The fairy lifted off my chest and up into the light. A fairy, Stella noted, in the flat voice of someone already writing the paper. A spirit body, by the look of it. I explained it as plainly as I could. Not a demon to be driven out. A demon saint, a 1,000-year-old maker of spirit magic who had, as it turned out, been quietly raising my disciple her whole life. Colette followed maybe half of it. She looked up at the small crossed-arm figure in the air. I don't really understand, she said, but thank you very much. Diana turned away and pretended very hard that this did not affect her, and then, grudgingly, as though it cost her something to say, agreed to teach. So that was one more for the house. An inn, a town, a broken enemy running my errands, a guild in my pocket, and now a fire saint on the staff. I had built more in 10 days than I had owned in a whole first life. I should have felt finished, but Diana had spoken a name up there in the fire, and the name had a shadow behind it. Ruinvale, the Demon King. There was a dungeon out past the ruins with his name on it, waiting under all that empty country we had just promised the guild we would open. And every time I turned the name over, something in the borrowed clay of me went cold. I had wanted a slow life. I kept saying it, like a spell of my own. The trouble with saying a thing in an old language is that it works whether or not you understand it. And I was only starting to understand that whatever was waking up out past the mountains had never, for one moment, intended to let me rest. 3 broke men sat in a tavern in Ashford, and one of them meant to steal my heart. Not the poet's kind, the stone kind, the core that ran my dungeon. I pieced their night together afterward, the way you reconstruct a crime from the wreckage it leaves. 2 of them, Toby and Marco, had been hanging off Victor's coattails when Victor fell, and they had been drinking away a ruined name ever since. The dungeon boom had made half of Ashford rich, mithril, and old magic tools coming up by the cartload, and the 2 of them had watched every coin of it land in somebody else's hand. Then a 3rd man pulled up a chair, Lyle, a wizard, academy trained, once one of Edgar's crew, and Edgar was in a cell now, with his party scattered to the wind. Lyle had slipped the noose by a hair, and he had no interest in honest guild work. He wanted mine. He told them, in the low, careful voice of a man selling a bridge he does not own, that the wizard people were calling the Demon King had seized a dungeon core, that a core could be taken, that the right man with the right notes could rule a whole dungeon from the dark and never show his face. Toby was wary. Marco was already spending the gold in his head. Lyle swore his academy training could crack the control method, so they shook on it. 3 men with nothing left decided the safest thing to do with their lives was walk straight into mine. A cart service ran out of Ashford now, 1 day each way. Some sharp merchant's clever idea, and it set them down at my front gate by afternoon. They skipped the registration desk on purpose, keeping their names off my books, which was adorable, because the moment they crossed the gate, they were on every eye I owned. I watched them take the town in, a shop sign that read Dale's Blacksmith, until the old gnome shuffled out, flipped it, and left it reading Ernie's Tool Shop instead. A rack of blades marked failed products at 5,000 gold each. Good enough that Marco's appraisal skill kept insisting they could not possibly be failures. Toby made a joke about lifting one. A small silver mascot cat came out of nowhere, raked 3 quick lines across his cheek, and was gone before he finished flinching. There was a sign for that too. Thieves earned 10 days of sharpening the cat's claws. The 3 of them drifted past a pair of adventurers, bragging about a stamina potion from my inn. 1 bottle. A full day of fighting without rest. The town was working exactly as I had built it to work, and 3 thieves were strolling through the display case admiring the merchandise. Julia stepped out of the inn in plain clothes, glanced their way, and kept walking. She had worked my front desk for weeks by then. Whether she recognized 3 ghosts from her old dungeon or simply could not be bothered, she gave them nothing, and they were too rattled to test her. They found the status monument next. 10 gold to see your own numbers, your level, your rank against everyone who had ever registered. Toby fed it a coin and landed somewhere in the middle of the pack. Lyle fed it a coin and came out 24th, and I have never watched a man take a ranking so personally. Back in Ashford, he was certain he belonged in the top 10. Toby was getting nervous. He kept looking at all of it, the systems, the signage, the machine that put numbers on people, and I could see the thought surfacing behind his eyes. Whoever built this is not going to be a fun man to rob. He said out loud that they could still turn back. They did not turn back. They found a dark corridor marked no entry for unauthorized persons, decided the core had to be waiting behind it, and went in. Here is where it stops being a tour and starts being a machine. Lyle took the lead with detection magic and announced, thoroughly pleased with himself, that his shadow hand could null any trap in his path. He was half right. It nulled the traps he could see. They shoved open a stone door into a bright room the core had grown out of nothing, all clean angles and hard light, and a single red fireclay figure peeked from behind a pillar, the way a cat watches a doorway. Then the rest of them came. The swarm poured out of the walls, 10, then 20, then past counting, small burning shapes with no faces and no mercy in them, and they went for the mage first. Lyle got 2 words of a spell out of his mouth before they took him under. Toby and Marco hauled the door shut with him on the wrong side of it, Marco babbling about a burning girl and a little flying demon he had glimpsed through the glare, some ritual he did not understand and never would. He did not get to finish the sentence. White thread dropped out of a hole in the ceiling, wound around him, and pulled him straight up into the dark. And then Toby was alone. The floor turned under Toby's feet, a wall that spun on a hidden pivot, and dropped him down a chute into a low room he was never meant to see. Bodies lay slack along the walls, still, breathing slow, not dead, drained, resting, waiting to wake up as somebody new. Toby did not understand that part yet. He just saw a big beastman in a pale clay figure mask rise up in front of him. "None shall gather the fallen," the beastman said, formal as an old stage play, and named himself the dungeon's watchman. Toby backed away from him, straight into a chest he knew, Victor. Toby's face did something terrible and hopeful all at once. He asked, half sure of it, whether Victor had come to save him. Victor only smiled and tied his hands. He told him, gently, the way you would soothe a frightened child, that Toby would become one of them now, that they would all work together from here on for the sake of their lord. Then he hung him on a great flowering man-eater plant, and its vines folded around him and began, without hurry and without a drop of blood, to draw the strength out of him, not to kill, just enough to make him quiet and make him listen. The betrayer's own hangers-on, delivered to my intake by the betrayer himself. I will admit I enjoyed the shape of that. I watched the whole thing from my command room, 60 centimeters of clay in a chair built for something larger. 3 feeds open in front of me like a security desk on a slow night. Somewhere in the walls on the way down, Lyle's shadow magic had tried to claw into my terminal. It found the auto recovery, threw a small tantrum, and lost. The screen flickered once and came back clean. 3 intruders, all accounted for. Julia had reported 3, and here were 3. I gave the order the way you sign for a delivery. Drain them a little, let them rest, send them home, And when they woke, weak and grateful and short on better options, they would find that they had somehow been hired. That was the part I kept turning over in my hands. In my first life, a place a great deal like this one used me all the way up and threw the husk away. And here I sat running the same machine, only I had made mine merciful. I fed my enemies into it, and it handed them back as staff. It should have troubled me more than it did. It was tidy. It was not the whole bill. Edgar sat in a cell, Lyle hung in a cocoon, and somewhere out there, the men who had actually given the orders were still sleeping just fine. I filed the three of them undersolved and turned back to the thing that actually frightened me. The thing that frightened me got its own meeting. We held them on a schedule now, the whole strange staff of us around one table, and I opened this one by complaining that I was overworked and wanted a slow life. It got the laugh it deserved and changed nothing. Dale went first. He had finished the blade Zane asked for, a katana, mithril steel, copied off some old foreign films I had once described badly from memory. Zane drew it and watched the light run down the edge. Now I need not feel ashamed as a samurai serving my lord, he told Dale, then ruined the moment by announcing that tonight his blade thirsted for blood, and the table politely let it pass. Ernie laid out a row of old magic tools the crews had dug up. None of them understood yet. Julia reported the inn full and the coin good, and that the parties had pushed all the way down to the 5th layer, where they had found something she could not explain. A device. Old, humming, wrong. I turned to Diana. She was a fairy the size of a hand these days, sharp-tongued and violently allergic to being useful, and she waved the question off until I mentioned, mildly, that I could always cut the thread that let her stay near Colette. Colette flinched. Diana folded. The demon godstone is a world seed, she said. Cross about every syllable of it. The places we called dungeons were not caves at all. They were other worlds, whole and conceptual, grown out of that seed like fruit off a branch. The table went quiet. I had built a town on the roof of one of them. If there was a wrong world humming under my town, I wanted to lay eyes on it before it laid eyes on me. The connected dungeon had no name I liked, so I called it Dungeon B and stopped fretting about it. Getting in meant going through Stella at the guild outpost, and Stella was enjoying her posting far too much. She signed off on the permission, registered Zane and Colette as temporary adventurers, a warrior and a magician, since the desk had no box for samurai, and sold me a hand-drawn map down to the 4th layer for 1,200 gold. She slid it across the counter and offered, sweetly, to cover the cost herself. "Show me the clay figure dance," she said, "and it is on me." I did not do the clay figure dance. I logged the map into my system, handed it to Julia, and put the party together. Me, Julia, Colette, Zane. Getting me down there was its own small indignity. Ernie had built a child carrier, a clay figure holder he called it, and Colette wore it on her back, with me tucked inside like a backpack that could give orders. The 1st layer of Dungeon B was a nursery, packed with beginners, hacking at monsters that respawned as fast as they fell. A few of them called out to Zane and waved at Colette on the way past. Not one of them looked twice at the odd little clay doll riding on the girl's shoulders. We threaded through the crowd and pressed on down toward the dark. The 2nd layer was black as a closed throat. Julia raised a light, and I switched on the new toy. I had built a party system, threads of curse magic strung between all of us like a climber's rope line, and when I turned it on, it wove us into one shared thing. Everyone's status laid out at a glance. One map between us. One silent channel we could all speak on without opening our mouths. The numbers told their own quiet story. Zane, a wall of health with almost no magic in him. Colette, barely any health at all and a well of magic far too deep for her level. Julia, steady down the middle. And me, level somewhere in the mid-40s. More magic than the 3 of them put together, and so little health that a stiff breeze could have finished me. A commander made of clay, still one solid hit away from nothing, walking 3 people into the dark to go stare at a thing I already knew I should fear. Julia said that even a party thrown together this fast could move like one, that an ambush anywhere would reach all of us in the same breath. She was right. So we took the short road down, toward the 4th layer, toward the 5th, toward the humming device that Diana's world seed had just turned from a curiosity into a countdown. The 2nd layer tried to kill us, and gave up in about the time it takes to say so. 3 cave trolls came out of the dark, the same kind of thing that once would have ended me in a breath. Zane stepped past all 3 before they finished turning their heads. One draw of the mithril katana, and the matter was closed. He flicked the blade clean and told me it was not even worth calling a test cut. I rode the whole fight in a padded box on Colette's back, a 60-centimeter clay doll with a single blunt horn, watching red markers wink out on my map. Being carried into battle like luggage does something to a man's dignity. I had made my peace with it. The leeches on the way down were worse only because there were more of them. Colette lifted a hand and called up a swarm of tiny fire figures, little burning dolls that skittered into the pack and burst. The giant leeches decided all at once to be somewhere else. Diana hovered at Colette's shoulder the whole time, arms folded, grading her like a tutor at an exam, and not lifting a finger herself. On the 4th floor, a drake came for us, a low sort of dragon, all scales and bad temper. It did not last either. Julia put her sword through the gap in its guard, then stood over it looking less pleased than she should have. "So when's my turn?" she said, to no one. I didn't even get to shine. I told her the floor was getting harder, and that on her own, she would already be at her limit here. It was meant as a comfort. Judging by her face, it landed as the opposite. We had not gone much further when something came out of the side passage, pointing a crossbow at us. It was a man, or most of one. Blood down one side, one arm hanging wrong, a second man slung over his shoulder who was not moving much at all. He saw the wolf ears on Zane, and the crossbow shook harder. Then he saw Julia, and the fight went out of him all at once. "Julia," he breathed, "running into a werewolf down here. I thought I was finished." His name was Gale. Julia knew him, an adventurer out of Ashford, middling rank, the careful sort who lived by knowing when to run. He was not doing much running now. He got the words out between breaths. 2 of his party dead, 1 more missing somewhere in the dark. Something had come out of nowhere and taken them apart, something that led the rest, and he warned us to turn back before it found us too. He was still saying it when it found us. They came out of the shadows themselves, 8 of them, black shapes with fur that stood up like flame, half beast and half something else. The kind of thing the abandoned land tells stories about. My detection domain had not shown them coming. That alone told me what we were dealing with. They did not walk into the room so much as pour out of the places the light did not reach. Then the last one stepped through, and the temperature of the whole fight changed. The alpha stood over 3 meters, and it carried itself like something that had never once lost. There was a pressure coming off it that I can only call divine, the way a small animal knows a bigger one has entered the field. My allies felt it too. Zane's grip shifted on the katana. Julia's breath caught. I did the math in about a second. A thing that steps through shadows will not fight my front line, honestly. It will slide past them and open a throat from behind while they are still swinging at where it used to be. Against a party, it picks you apart one at a time. Against a decoy who cannot really die the way they can, it only wastes itself. Colette, get to Julia. Cover her. Zane. I left to the pack because there was no one better for it. Then I climbed out of the box on Colette's back, dropped to the stone, and woke the demon stone fragment buried in my clay. Drew the short straw again, I thought. It was becoming a habit. The build came up around me. Code X, my own system, written for a body with 0 lives left and no room for a single honest mistake. I did not try to be faster than it. I was never going to be faster than it. So I stopped fighting the monster and started fighting the room. First, the field went up. A lattice of curse threads strung through the air around me, set to move my clay body before my slow clay mind ever registered the danger. When the alpha blurred in the first time, I did not dodge. The threads dodged for me, and I was simply somewhere else when the claws came down. I answered with nail strike, a spray of hardened curse bullets. 2 of them bit into its shoulder. The rest it shrugged off like rain. It reared back and loosed a roar that came out as a wall of force, and half my thread barrier tore away in a heartbeat. Fine. I had never planned to win with the barrier. I seeded the room instead. Small dark spheres of cursed magic, mines, left drifting loose in the air between us, patient as furniture. The alpha came again and clipped one, and for the first time it flinched. Good. It was learning that the front of the room was expensive, so it did the thing I had been waiting for. It dropped into the shadows to come around behind me, where the prey always is, where the kill is easy. I had strung a second web back there, laid down in advance, waiting in the exact dark it chose to jump into. It came out of the shadow behind me, and the web caught it, just for a heartbeat, just long enough. I laid the target mark on its skull, a lock that told every weapon I owned precisely where to go. Then I flipped the mines to hedgehog. Every floating sphere opened at once and became a storm of nails, and every nail already knew its address. They converged on the marked point from every angle in the room, while the alpha hung in my threads with nowhere left to slide. The thing that had never lost met a problem that had already been solved before it ever committed to the jump. When the storm cleared, the great black shape came down and did not get up. I stood in the wreckage of my own trap, a clay doll that had just out-engineered a God-pressured predator, and felt the old, specific satisfaction. Not strength. I had no strength. I had a system, and the system had worked. The pack did not last long once its leader was gone. Zane moved through the remaining beasts the way water moves through a gap, one clean line, and where the katana passed, the shadows simply stopped. Then Colette raised both hands, and this time it was not little exploding dolls. It was fire that held its shape, a swarm of burning motes she sent out like insects, each one turning on its own to hunt a target. "Fire bee," she called, delighted with herself. 3 shadow beasts went into the light, and none came back out. I watched the way she handled the flame and felt something between pride and mild professional envy. It was my spell, or it had been. I cast it out of borrowed ancient magic, and it came out stiff in my hands. In hers, it moved like it had been waiting for her its whole life. Borrowing another's magic never controls cleanly, Diana informed me, pleased to explain the obvious. When it is your own, there is no seam. Colette's was her own now. Julia sat against the wall and stitched her own scratches shut with a thread of healing light. "You really are strong, Adrian," she said, and it was not entirely a compliment. "I feel like I'm getting left behind." "Careful," I told her, "or I would fold her into a box and carry her too." She threw a pebble at the clay doll. It bounced off my horn. Fair enough. Gale had watched the whole thing from the floor, forgotten. When it was over, he looked at the clay doll standing in the middle of a dead god beast's ruin, and something clicked behind his eyes. "Wait, Adrian? Seriously, the Adrian?" He half laughed and half winced. "They used to swear you were the laziest magician in Ashford." "Once," I told him. That reputation and I had parted ways. I asked him to keep my name out of his stories, and he swore it on the spot. Benefactor this, and of course that. The gratitude of a man who had expected to die in the dark and had not. Then he asked the hard thing. One of his party was still missing somewhere on these floors, and 2 were dead and would need bringing home. Could we help with the search and with recovering them? He would find a way to pay it back. I left Zane and Julia to it. They could clear these floors in their sleep, and Gale needed the company more than I did. Before we split, he told me what he knew about the deeper dark, the thing his party had been circling before it all went wrong, a strange machine on the 5th layer that the whole floor seemed to hum around. That was the second time in a single week that someone had described that device to me, and I had a bad feeling I wanted to check early. I took Colette and Diana, and we went down. The 5th layer opened into a room that did not belong in a dungeon. A great circle was cut into the floor, and over it stood machinery I had no word for, rings and struts and slow-turning parts, all of it breathing out that hum I had been hearing described for a week. The air felt thick, the way it feels standing next to a door left open onto somewhere very cold. Diana took one look and named it without hesitation. "No mistake about it," she said. It was a monster summoning device. It reached across into the demon world and pulled creatures out of it, one gate at a time, and set them loose in hours. I put my hand to it and ran analyze. The thing was awake. It had been awake a long time, opening a portal on a schedule, one a day, patient as a clock, stacking up whatever came through with no obvious reason for the hoarding. That was the part I did not like. Machines that gather without a purpose are usually gathering for someone else's. The link only ran one way, Diana told me. Nothing crossed back, and the demon world on the far side of it was not a place a person simply walked into. Only a demon king and a handful of hands he trusted could reach through from that end. I was standing in front of a door built by the very thing whose stone was buried in my chest. She said, lightly, that I could rewrite it if I wanted, change whose name the device answered to, make its monsters mine. I did not answer right away. There was a downside to that too, and I wanted to see all of it first. I did not solve it in a day. I came back to that room across 5 of them, hand on the machine, reading it the way I used to read a system I had not written, one careful pass at a time. By the end, I had 3 things out of it. I had its control method, the way to make my name the one it obeyed. I had the shape of a fixed gate, a teleport circle I could tie back to my own dungeon core and lock to my people alone. And I had its logs, every gate it had ever opened, every count of what came through, going back and back. I read those logs the way you read a monitor at 3 in the morning when the numbers have stopped making sense. Day after day, the same small trickle. One gate, a handful of monsters. One gate, a handful more. Steady, boring, safe. And then one line where the count did not trickle, where it spiked into something that is not a number a village survives. One night, about a year gone, when the machine had thrown its doors wide and emptied the demon world into ours all at once. Colette went very still beside beside me. She knew the date before I said it. "It's the blue moon night," she said quietly. "Isn't it?" It was. The night the monsters had come in a flood and taken her home off the map. The elves had lived through those nights before, only because they raised barriers against exactly this. And when the barriers failed, so did they. This machine, humming under my hand, was the thing that had done it. Not a curse, not fate, a device on a schedule. Then I found the next line on that schedule. The next spike the machine was already counting toward. I read the date twice to be sure of it. 10 days. The next blue moon night was 10 days out, and there were no elf barriers left standing between it and everything I had spent this whole long climb building. 10 days, and a flood aimed straight at the frontier that trusted me to hold it. The hum of the machine did not change. It had no idea it had just started a clock. Colette asked in a small voice whether we should just break it, smash the machine, and be done. I had already thought about it. There was a downside to that too. If I destroyed this device, the blue moon still came. Everywhere else these machines lay buried, and all I would have done is throw away the one I could aim. Worse, a broken relic and an intact dungeon core in the same hands would have the Ravensgate Kingdom decide I was a threat worth removing before I grew into a bigger one. They watched this dungeon with spies and far-seeing magic. Whatever I did down here, they would hear about it. They already had. Adventurers gossip. So I did the other thing. I took it. I rewrote the machine to answer to me, tied its gate to my core, and locked it to my own people. The monsters it kept pulling through, I walled off behind a barrier of their own, penned away from the dungeon's native beasts so the two would not tear into each other before I found a use for either. A quiet life. That was all I had ever asked for. I had said it out loud in a staff meeting not long ago and walked straight from the words into a heist and a descent. And now I was standing over a doomsday machine with a countdown already running, calling myself a plague god under my breath, because if I did not make the joke, I would have to feel the size of the thing instead. 10 days. That was what I had. 10 days to turn a machine built to end a village into the wall that saved a frontier, with a party still half-trained and a body that a single honest hit would still end. I took my hand off the device, and I started counting. 9 days. That was the number when I let Colette sling me over her shoulder like a bag of laundry and carried me up the frontier road. And I spent most of the walk pretending a clay doll the size of a lapdog still had dignity left to lose. Then we came over the rise, and I stopped pretending. The elf village I remembered had been a scatter of empty houses and a barrier that no longer worked. What I looked at now was a town. New roofs, raw and pale, packed shoulder to shoulder. Fields already turned and planted. People everywhere, beastmen and dwarves and human refugees. More than 100 of them, out of half the nations that had thrown them away. A year ago, this was ruins. Somebody had decided to live here anyway. It grew, Colette said, and left it there. She had no good memories of this place and never pretended otherwise. A broad man with a gray-streaked beard met us at the first houses. Old adventurer's walk, sword-calloused hands, a face that had buried people and kept moving. He looked at the clay doll riding on Colette's back without so much as a blink, which told me Roland had already warned him what I was. "Dominic," he said, "I run the expedition here." No bow, no flattery. I liked him at once. "The guildmaster tells me you're the reason we might live through the month." Behind me, Julia snorted. "He's also the reason the month is trying to kill you. Ask him about that part." I let it go. Somewhere under the overcast, 9 days out and counting, a machine I now owned was getting ready to empty the demon world onto these new roofs. Small talk could wait for the survivors. Inside the hall, I laid it out plain. The summoning device on the 5th layer had logged a spike a year ago, the night that gutted the elf village. The next spike fell in 9 days, aimed here, and there were no elf barriers left to soften it. Julia said the sensible thing first. "Then we don't stand here and wait for it. We pull everyone into the dungeon, seal the door, let it wash past." "No," I said. "Two problems. The horde doesn't go home at dawn. It lingers, it hunts, and it breeds. Seal the door and you're still trapped in a box, with it scratching to get in for weeks. Second, the device down there isn't the only gate in the deep floors. Hide inside, and something opens behind you. Then, you're caught between two fronts with a wall at your back." Stella turned her silver staff slow between two fingers. "And a box is the worst possible ground for me," she said. Give me open sky and a field to freeze, and I can break an army. Pen me in a corridor, and I am a very expensive candle. Dominic didn't waste breath asking about retreat to Ravensgate. There's no home to run to, he said. The Crown started throwing our kind out 3 years ago. We go back, we get blamed for the monsters at our heels, and the refugees hang for it. From the day we set out, there was no going back. So it was settled, the way I wanted it settled anyway. We would meet the blue moon in the open and destroy the whole horde on the field, or nothing here survived. I can raise you a fortress, I told them. Walls, traps, a mana network wired to my core, all of it out of dungeon functions. I need a core fragment for the terminals. Stella's mouth curved. I'll bring one from my research, she said, and something private crossed her face. Maybe it's time I let that go anyway. Roland put a fist on the table. 50 adventurers. I can pull from the dungeon with a good reward. Dominic gives you 50 settlers who can hold a line. He looked at me across the table, this huge graying man who had no idea yet what tonight would ask of him. You give us the rest, 50 and 50, and a clay doll to knit them into a wall. I started counting down in earnest. Down at the core, I spent mana I had been hoarding, over 40,000 points, and I meant to turn all of it into things that would still be standing at dawn. First, I built a soldier out of the cheapest template the core owned, a shadow beast, and then I made it expensive. Shadow submersion, regeneration, a splitting trick that let one body become two. When the core finished, what padded out onto the floor was a small black puppy with 2 bright eyes. It looked up at me and split cleanly into 2 smaller puppies, then back into one, delighted with itself. All right, I said. Your name is Sid. Sid answered by licking the side of my clay head and diving into my shadow like it was a warm bed. Fine. The apocalypse could have a mascot. Then I brought back Titus. He had fallen in the raid weeks ago, holding a line so the rest of us could break through, and I had carried the debt of that ever since. The core offered me an evolution for a price, and this once I didn't argue over the cost. I paid it. What rose in the outer hall was not the 3-meter guardian I had lost. It was 10 meters of gray carved stone, moss crushed into the seams, a blunt rock head brushing the ceiling. It sat because it could not stand up indoors, and even sitting it filled the room. Adrian, Julia's voice came out flat and slightly muffled from somewhere under the thing's stone knee. This is the one that put me out of action for a week the first time we met, and now it is on top of me, again. It took a full day to walk the giant out into the daylight. I decided that was the day the fortress got its anchor. Over the next days, I raised the wall, high gray stone in a ring, mounted crossbows along the top, pitfalls and bear traps seated in the field beyond it. Stella's core fragment went into terminals wired back to my own core, so that from the command room, I could watch every stretch of ground in real time and feed magic anywhere along the line. I built mana tanks out of magic stones and packed 10 days of stored power into them, quietly, where no one thought to ask what they were for. Titus. I sat at the wall's weak shoulder, 10 meters of patience. Sid, I kept in my shadow. Dominic drilled his settlers to hold and not to chase. And somewhere in the middle of all that hammering, I caught myself on the thing I had decided without deciding. I could have sealed the door and let it all burn. The frontier, the refugees, and behind them, the kingdom that had named me useless and left me for dead in a hole. Every hand that had thrown me away was somewhere out past this wall, sheltering behind it whether they knew it or not. I could have kept my box and let the world settle its own accounts. I built the wall higher instead. I told myself it was strategy. A horde loose in the open was a problem that came back, but the truer reason was smaller and harder to say out loud. I knew exactly what it felt like to be the thing everyone agreed was disposable. I was not going to be the one who did it to somebody else. 9 days became 1. On the last afternoon, the sky went the wrong color early, and I went up to the command room to wait for the moon. The preparations were done. There is no point flailing about once the work is finished. So I sat with the monitors and waited, and Julia came and sat with me, and for a while, neither of us said anything. Then she said, "Is it really all right to be this relaxed?" "The work's done," I told her. "Flailing won't add a wall." She laughed a little at that, and then she went quiet again. And when she spoke the next time, her voice had changed. "Adrian, last year's blue moon, the one who pulled me out of it, back at Ashford. That was you, wasn't it?" I searched for it and found nothing. "Sorry, I don't remember. Didn't you always say Victor was the one who saved you? That's so like you." She wasn't angry. She almost smiled. "No interest in anybody. I knew your name for years before you ever bothered to learn mine." She looked at her hands. It was you, and you don't even remember it. Somehow that makes it easier to say the rest. I didn't push. I just let her lay it down, one piece at a time, the way you set down something you've carried too long to drop all at once. When I was small, she said, my father brought a dungeon core home. He didn't know what it was, not really. And while he was away on a job, it went berserk. It swallowed our town. The whole town, Adrian. My mother got me out through the back and went back in for someone else, and she didn't come out again. The room held very still. On the monitors, the light kept dimming toward the wrong shade of evening. The way she told it, I could almost stand in it. The narrow lane, the roar behind her, a small girl running with her mother's hand crushing hers, and then the hand letting go, on purpose, pushing her forward one last time. A door that opened once and never opened again. She had been living in that lane ever since, running, never quite allowed to stop. I blamed him for years, she went on. My father. He kept leaving little me behind to go adventuring. And then, of all the jobs in the world, he took the one running a guild full of the same things that killed her. I became an adventurer to make him look at me. I came all the way out here to get as far from the capital as I could and prove I didn't need him. Her voice thinned. And I know now it wasn't his fault. Deep down, I always knew. I just wanted him to notice I was still here, avoiding him this whole time. It's starting to feel stupid. So notice him back, I said. It was not wisdom. It was the only true thing I had. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand and let out a breath that shook on the way out. Sorry, strange time to unload all that. A wet laugh. But I feel a little lighter. Thank you, Adrian, for the last one and this one. You're welcome, I said. Then, on the monitors, the first thin edge of it cleared the far hills, and the whole field went blue. The moon's up, I said quietly. It's about to start. The blue moon poured its light over everything, and the ground beyond the wall came alive. They came out of the dungeon mouth and the broken places in the field, more of them every second, a tide with no back edge. Ogres and ghouls on the ground, gargoyles and wyverns and harpies churning the sky. Roland stood on the wall with his greatsword bare and read them off the way another man might read the weather, his true eye cutting through the dark. It's going to be a long night, he said, and swung into the first thing that reached the top. The traps did their work, and it was not enough. Pitfalls swallowed the front rank, and the ranks behind trampled over them like a road. Along the wall, the settlers and adventurers loosed crossbow bolts into the dark, and Dominic held the weak stretch with a blade in each hand, cutting down lizardmen as fast as they came, his shoulders already heaving. Then the field went white. Stella dropped a mountain of ice into the middle of the horde, a block the size of a house, and the ground around it locked solid with everything caught in it. Where the flyers thickened, she poured out a freezing fog she called whiteout, and their wings iced and their formations came apart in the cold. It was magnificent, and from the command room, I watched the counter climb anyway. There were simply too many. Ice and fog and steel were buying minutes, and the night was long. On the wall, Roland shouted the question everyone was thinking. Where were the reserves? Into my terminal, I said. I don't have any. A beat. That was a lie. Go, Titus. Clear the field. 10 meters of stone stood up out of the smoke and walked into the horde, and monsters went under him like grass. Then the tide parted and something walked out to meet him, near his own height, purple-skinned and streaming a sick miasma off its shoulders. A poison giant, the same breed that had gutted the elf village a year ago, come to finish the job. It closed with Titus, and the two of them locked, grappling, two mountains leaning on each other in the fog. Behind it, more of the big ones shouldered through, a grand turtle, a great horn, each one built to Titus's scale, and for one bad moment the whole line bent inward. Titus set his stone feet, wound one arm back, and launched his fist clean off his wrist on a jet of force. The rocket punch took the poison giant square in the face and knocked it off him, and it did not get back up the same way it had gone down. But there were still two more of its size coming, and the horde behind them had no bottom. Colette's voice came over the network, tight and clear. The real fight starts here, Master. She was right. Steel was spent. Time to broadcast. All right, I said, to the room and the whole wired line at once. This is a hassle, so let's finish it fast. Today is a no overtime day. Brandon looked up from the terminal beside me. Big brother, we're already working overtime. Sid barked once, firmly, on Brandon's side. Noted, I said. Overruled. Julia, Colette, pour everything you have into the network. Now. Julia set both hands to the terminal, light magic running up her arms into the mana tanks. Leave it to me, she said, and for the first time all night, she sounded like she believed it. Colette pressed her palms flat and let go, and fire climbed up her arms and did not burn her, roaring orange and white, the same fire that a year ago she had been forbidden to touch. Diana hovered at her shoulder, feeding the control, her tiny fairy hands shaping what Colette poured. The gift that had once been Colette's curse ran clean into the tanks and filled them to the brim. I opened the thing I had built in secret across 10 days of stored mana. Code X, I said. Version 3.0, Enterprise Edition. Mode, Broadcast. This was the whole story in one command. The reason a man with no strength and 0 lives to spend was worth more than any sword on that wall. I did not swing anything. I compiled. Out over the field, Stella's frost fog was hanging in a vast pale sheet, and I used it as a screen. Terminal by terminal, the network threw magic circles up onto the fog, hundreds of them, until the entire sky over the horde was one enormous array of light, drawn and locked and waiting on my mark. Diana's voice came dry over the link. You really think it goes that smoothly, boy? I keyed the last line. Firebee, I said. Starfall. The sky came down. Every circle in that vast array ignited at once, and fire fell out of all of them together. A rain of burning stars pouring onto the field in a single roaring cascade. Not one bolt, not 10. Thousands, seeding out of the fog Stella had hung there, out of the fire Colette had made, out of the 10 days of mana I had hoarded in silence, while everyone thought the tanks were empty crates. The meteors walked across the horde from one edge to the other. The tide that had no back edge found its back edge. Ranks that had trampled the pitfalls like a road vanished under the fire. The big ones, the Grand Turtle, the Great Horn, the second poison giant hauling itself up, went down into the light and stayed there. Titus stood in the middle of it, stone and unbothered, moss smoking faintly on his shoulders while the world burned around his knees. From the command room, it did not look like a battle anymore. It looked like weather. It looked like someone had opened a window in the sky and let the whole thing fall through. This was the mantle the old stories gave a demon king, made real and made mine. I held the device that opened the demon world. I held the gate. And on the one night a year it was built to end a village, I was the one who turned it around and used the sky to end the horde instead. The roaring went on, and then, slowly, there was less to burn. By the time the fire burned down, dawn was coming up gray over a field that had gone still. The horde was broken. What was left of it was scattered and leaderless and dying on its own, exactly the way Zane had promised it would once there was nothing left to command it. Along the wall, the defenders lowered their weapons and did not quite believe it yet. They were all alive. That was the part that mattered. Roland leaned on his greatsword and breathed. Dominic sat down where he stood, both blades across his knees, settlers alive on either side of him. Stella looked out at the frost and the ash and said nothing, which for her was a great deal. Julia found her father across the wall and, for once, did not look away from him. And down the line, among the adventurers Roland had pulled from the dungeon, stood a broad blonde man in plain gray cloth with no armor and no sword. Victor, one of the ones who had stood over me in that hole a lifetime ago and agreed I was baggage, useless, better left behind. He was breathing this morning because of a wall a useless man had built and a sky a useless man had called down. Nobody made him kneel. Nobody made a speech. There was no need. The whole frontier had spent the night sheltering behind the one they threw away, and the kingdom that had exiled every soul on this wall would go on breathing tomorrow for the same reason, whether it ever learned the name or not. The account that had been open since the first chapter closed itself, quietly, in front of everyone who had helped run it up. Not a punishment, a fact. The disposable one was the ground they were all standing on. Back in the command room, the monitors were going soft and gray, one stretch of quiet field at a time. And there it goes, I said, mostly to myself. I wanted to save that one for a holiday. Brandon gave me a look. Sid climbed half out of my shadow, decided the danger was over, and went back to sleep in it. Colette came in from the wall with soot on her face, and the last of the fire finally gone quiet in her hands. And she didn't say anything, and she didn't have to. I was still a clay doll 60 centimeters tall, still 0 lives, still one honest hit from nothing, exactly as fragile as I had been the day they left me. I had ended an apocalypse from a chair, and I could not have won a fistfight with any single monster on that field. That was the whole point. I never got a strong body. I got a system, and I got people, and it turned out those weighed more. A year ago, I had wanted one thing, under all the jokes, not power, something of my own that could not throw me away, a place and people that were mine to keep. I looked at the gray monitors and the sleeping puppy, and the girl with soot on her face, and the whole town breathing outside the wall, and I understood that I finally had it. The slow, quiet life I kept saying I wanted was still on hold, of course. There was always another machine humming in a deep floor somewhere, but the home was real, and no one alive could take it from me now. For the first time since I woke in this small clay body, I stopped counting down to anything. I let the console go dark, and I let myself rest.